Chapter 4:14. The profession of a butcher is a matter of taking lives. Every day, his hands are stained with blood, and he cuts off flesh and bones. Over the years, even the calmest person will be tempered into a violent and ruthless person. The woman looked at the butcher, Wuxia Xianxia. Although she made him sound very fierce, there was no fear in her expression. She even smiled and said, "It's the first time I've seen a butcher as gentle and refined as you." Wuxia Xianxia stood where he was and his expression changed slightly. After a moment of silence, he said, "You're exaggerating. There are no absolutes in this world. Perhaps I'm an exception. Also, I don't think you just happened to pass by here. May I know your name?" The charming woman smiled and said, "My name is Song Wenji." Wuxia Xianxia pondered for a moment as if going through his memory. He then looked at Song Wenji and said, "I don't think I've known you before, Miss Song. May I know why you're looking for me?" Song Wenji didn't answer his question. She casually plucked a branch of peach blossom from the peach tree beside her and sniffed it lightly. Then, she said lightly, "How can there be so many coincidences in this world? It's just that everyone can't see that far ahead. You're pretending to be a butcher, but you don't look like one. There are probably only two possibilities." Wuxia Xianxia sounded a little curious. He said, "I'll have to ask you about that." "Please teach me, Mississippi," Song Wenji said. "I wouldn't dare to teach you. I'm just spouting nonsense. The first possibility is that you've been pretending to be a butcher all along. You've been using this line of work to cover your tracks. You've never been a butcher, so your temperament naturally hasn't changed." Wuxia Xianxia nodded and said, That makes sense. What about the second possibility?" Song Wenji looked at the young and handsome butcher and said with a smile, "The second possibility is that although you're really a butcher now, you've done things more ruthless than a butcher in the past. You've killed so many people that you've naturally become numb to it. Am I right?" Wuxia Xianxia's expression turned cold and he suddenly stopped talking. The small courtyard suddenly quietened down. Only the sound of the wind blowing through the peach tree could be heard. Other than that, the atmosphere suddenly turned somber. Separated by a corridor, the man and the woman stared at each other coldly. After some time, Wuxia Xianxia suddenly said, "Miss Song, who exactly are you, and why are you looking for me?" Just as Song Wenji was about to speak, a series of knocks came from the door of the butcher's shop that was already closed. Song Wenji and Wuxia Xianxia's expressions did not change much. They were still looking at each other with a hint of vigilance in their eyes, and they did not intend to look elsewhere. After a while, Wuxia Xianxia said in a clear voice, "This shop is closed. Please go back and come back early tomorrow." The knocks on the door stopped, probably having heard Wuxia Xianxia's words. Wuxia Xianxia looked at Song Wenji, took a deep breath, and was about to speak again. Knock, 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 knock. Suddenly, the same knocking sound came from the door again, and it broke the tranquility of this place once more. This time, Song Wenji and Wuxia Xianxia's expressions changed. They looked at each other almost at the same time, but then they saw the surprise in each other's eyes. It seemed that the possibility of the other party's helper could be ruled out. Wuxia Xianxia was silent for a moment, then turned to the door, raised his voice, and said with a hint of sternness, "This shop is closed for the day. Please go back." Knock, 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 knock. The knocks on the door seemed to completely ignore his words, and they were still knocking persistently. For a moment, the shop was in complete silence, and it seemed that only the strange and inexplicable knocks on the door were still echoing. Wuxia Xianxia's expression became a little strange. After a moment of silence, he looked at Song Wenji and pointed in the direction of the door. Song Wenji hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Wuxia Xianxia turned and walked to the door. He did not walk fast, and it could be seen that his hands were always by his side as he walked. He did not even swing them naturally like ordinary people, which made his walking posture look a little awkward and strange. Song Wenji soon noticed this. She stared at Wuxia Xianxia, and a hint of contemplation flashed across her eyes. The butcher's shop was only so big, so it did not take long for Wuxia Xianxia to reach the door. Just as he was about to reach out to open the door, the knocks on the door suddenly disappeared. Without any warning, he suddenly disappeared. Like a ghost, the silence instantly occupied the small courtyard, and Rui Xiaotian, who had just raised his hand, froze. The door was still tightly shut, but the knocks outside the door were gone. It was as if the person who had been waiting outside for a long time had finally lost his patience and left at that moment. However, neither Rui Xiaotian nor Song Wenji believed this possibility. Their expressions were a little ugly. After a while, Rui Xiaotian reached out and opened the door. The noise from the street outside could be heard, but there was no one outside the butcher's shop. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the knocks just now had never happened. Rui Xiaotian stood at the door and watched for a while before quietly closing the door again. He turned around and walked back to face Song Wenji again. He frowned and said, "Miss Song, who exactly are you?" Song Wenji thought about it and said, "I'm from Zhengxianmeng." Zhengxianmeng? Rui Xiaotian was stunned for a moment, and he seemed to be a little surprised by the answer. He then frowned and said, "I don't think I've ever offended Zhengxianmeng." "Why are you looking for me?" Song Wenji was about to speak, but her and Rui Xiaotian's expressions changed almost at the same time, and they turned to look. At the other end of the courtyard, Rui Xiaotian's bedroom was at the end of the corridor. At this moment, the door of the bedroom suddenly squeaked and opened. A man walked out of the room and stood at the door. He met Rui Xiaotian and Song Wenji's gazes and smiled. "Hello, I'm Lu Chen." Rui Xiaotian's pupils shrank slightly. He looked at Lu Chen, and then at the charming woman standing under the peach tree, Song Wenji. His expression finally lost its smile and calmness, and he shouted with a hint of anger, "Who are you? Also, how dare you break into my bedroom?" Lu Chen's expression was calm, as if he didn't care about Rui Xiaotian's harsh words. He just said indifferently, "I'm also from Zhengxianmeng. As for my identity, I should be the one asking you." Rui Xiaotian flew into a rage. Just as he was about to scold him, he heard Lu Chen say, "Stop pretending. Ordinary people won't secretly make 2 escape routes in their own homes. Let me be frank. One is in the bedroom behind me, and you can't get through it. As for the other one, Miss Song hasn't done anything from the beginning to the end. She's just standing under the peach tree, so the second escape route must be under the peach tree, under her feet. Am I right?" He said to Rui Xiaotian with a smile, looking like he was looking at a dog in a desperate situation. Chapter 4:15. The 3 people in the courtyard formed a triangle. After Lu Chen said that last sentence, there was a long period of silence. Rui Xiaotian's expression changed rapidly, turning green and white. Meanwhile, Song Wenji's attention seemed to have shifted from the young butcher to Lu Chen. She stared at Lu Chen with her bright and watery eyes, seemingly sizing up the man who had suddenly appeared curiously. After a while, Rui Xiaotian's expression turned cold, and he said coldly, "What are the 2 of you trying to do by barging into my house uninvited? Is Zhengxianmeng so arrogant that he can't tolerate a person like me who stands aloof from worldly affairs? Because you stand aloof from worldly affairs, so you like to dig a hole in the ground alone?" Lu Chen asked. Rui Xiaotian's expression became more and more terrible. Just as he was about to flare up, he suddenly heard Song Wenji ask, "Who are you?" The 2 men were stunned because Song Wenji did not speak to Rui Xiaotian this time. Instead, she looked at Lu Chen and asked, "You say that you work for Zhengxianmeng, but I've never seen you before. I'd like to ask, which hall under Zhengxianmeng do you belong to?" This beautiful woman had a gentle smile on her face, but her words weren't very polite. Lu Chen frowned and glanced at her. However, in the blink of an eye, he was suddenly stunned. He saw the charming and beautiful Song Wenji standing under the blooming peach tree in front of him. When the spring breeze blew past the treetops, the peach blossoms trembled and shone brilliantly. The person under the flowers was incomparably beautiful. It suddenly overlapped with a certain scene in his memory. At that moment, Lu Chen seemed to be stunned. Song Wenji also furrowed her beautiful and delicate brows. She was naturally very confident in her own appearance. She was also well aware of her own charm. After all, relying on these things, she had even grabbed onto the world's most powerful backer. Because of this, she would often encounter other men who were attracted by her beauty. Most of the time, she would just laugh it off. Those who knew her background would keep a respectful distance from her, and those who didn't know her background were far worse than her, so it wasn't worth getting angry over. However, one afternoon, she suddenly felt that the man named Lu Chen was looking at her very strangely. She wasn't disgusted by it, she just felt that it was a little strange. In that man's eyes, there was no greed, desire, jealousy, possessiveness, or even some hidden brutality that other men around her had when they looked at her in the past. Song Wenji even felt that this man called Lu Chen didn't seem to be looking at her, even though his eyes were looking at the peach tree at that moment. His eyes were gloomy and somewhat empty, as if his gaze had actually penetrated his own body and was looking at a place even further away. He seemed to be looking at something else. He seemed to be looking at someone else? Who is that person? In the great hall of Heavenly Law Hall, on a wide and lofty throne, Taihu Immortal, who was revered by the world, gently hugged Song Wenji and asked her with a smile. Song Wenji nestled beside this old but still incomparably powerful old man. Her intelligent and charming eyes flashed, as if thinking for a moment. She said, "I don't know about this, after all, I have never seen this Lu Chen before. But the way I looked at him, he probably thought of someone else from me, maybe also a woman." She pouted and said in a low voice, looking a little unhappy and a little angry. Taihu Immortal immediately broke into laughter. He stretched out his hand and lovingly pinched Song Wenji's fair and delicate little face. He said with a smile, "There is no shadow of this, you really know how to let your imagination run wild." Song Wenji didn't laugh. Instead, she pursed her lips and said with a little coquettishness and determination, "I have this kind of feeling, and my feeling is very accurate." Good. You are right. Taihu Immortal was a little helpless, but he still raised his hand and shook it affectionately. Then he asked again, "Did he tell you his identity in the end, and what is the background of that butcher?" Song Wenji said, "That butcher called Rui Xiaotian really has some tricks up his sleeves. While I was talking with that Lu Chen, he suddenly pressed some unknown mechanism, and several places in the courtyard exploded at the same time. The power was really not small, and that Lu Chen and I were caught off guard. We were busy dodging, but he took advantage of the chaos and slipped away." "Escaped?" Taihu Immortal frowned slightly. Song Wenji nodded. If it were other subordinates of Heavenly Law Hall who saw Taihu Immortal's dignified appearance, they would probably be so scared that their legs would turn to jelly. But Song Wenji's expression was calm, as if she didn't care at all, and Taihu Immortal really didn't blame her at all. "And then? Which Immortal Alliance Hall does that Lu Chen belong to?" Taihu Immortal asked Song Wenji. Song Wenji said, "He didn't say. I wanted to keep him, but this person's ability is very strange, and it is very different from the common Tao and divine powers. I was not careful, and actually let him escape." Taihu Immortal was silent for a moment and said, "So it seems that this person is most likely from Fuyunji." First, this name list originally came from Fuyunji. Other than us, if someone else came, probably only Fuyunji would do it. Second, who knows how many monsters of unknown origin and identity are hidden in Fuyunji. This area has always been unfathomable, and such strange people are the most common. Song Wenji nodded and said, "Godfather, you are right. In fact, before this, I also suspected Fuyunji, but I really didn't have any evidence, so I didn't dare to say it." At this point, she paused and said, "But about that Rui Xiaotian who ran away, I feel that he is a bit like a person." Taihu Immortal raised his eyebrows and said, "Who is it?" "Rui Mo, ranked third among the 5 devils of Blood Wing sect." Taihu Immortal looked deeply at Song Wenji and said, "Why do you say so?" Song Wenji said, "Legend has it that Rui Mo is most proficient in mechanisms and unorthodox techniques. Every time he goes to a place, he would often secretly explore and set up layers of mechanisms, which is very much like his style. Also, the surname Roy is the same as Roy Mo. You should know that there are not many people with the surname Roy in this world. Taihu Immortal was silent for a moment, and shook his head. You have talked for a long time, but there is no concrete evidence, so you can't take it seriously. Song Wenji didn't seem to be too surprised by Taihu Immortal's reaction. Perhaps she knew that this deity stage true lord, who had always been fair and honest, was like this. But at this time, she didn't care about the background of the two men, because she had more important things to say to Taihu Immortal. Godfather, I thought of something. Say it. If our previous guess is correct, Fuyunji and Bloodwing sect are involved in today's matter. From this, I also thought of the matter with Bloodwing sect. Lord Tianlan didn't give you face. Humph. Taihu Immortal snorted coldly without expression, but didn't say anything. Song Wenji gently pulled his arm, and then said in a low voice, if this is really the case, I think there is a way to let you go to Lord Tianlan and fight back. Taihu Immortal was startled, looking slightly surprised, and then said with a smile, I didn't expect you to be so smart now, tell me about it. Song Wenji smiled, and said with a charming face, Lord Tianlan took two people who defected to the enemy and pretended to be good people, then you can do the same. Taihu Immortal's heart moved, and then he revealed a trace of a smile, and said, don't tell me you mean. Song Wenji said with a smile, of the 5 demons of Bloodwing sect, 2 ran away, and the remaining ones are probably the 3 brothers. The woman leaned against Taihu Immortal, and then said with a smile, the same thing, that lord did, can't you do it? Taihu Immortal clapped his hands and laughed, and said, exactly. Chapter 4:16. Who is that woman? Have you seen her before? In a courtyard deep in the alley of Horse-Washing Bridge, Lu Chen and Old Ma sat in the courtyard and drank together. After drinking a cup of wine, Lu Chen asked Old Ma. Old Ma shook his head and said, I have never seen that woman, so I really don't know where she came from. As he spoke, he paused and pondered for a moment before continuing. For the first 10 years, you and I lived in Qingshidang village. In recent years, after you escaped to the south to the land of chaos, I only helped out with some trivial matters. In the end, I moved to Qingshidang village. Hence, apart from knowing a little about the Floating Clouds agency, I basically know nothing about the other halls in the Immortal Alliance. Lu Chen nodded. It seemed like he knew what Old Ma was talking about. After thinking for a moment, he said, that woman claimed to be from Zhengxianmeng, but I don't think she's from Fuyunji. Otherwise, there would be news from that damn Baldi and Shuang. How about this, when you have time, go and find out if there's a woman called Song Wenji in the Immortal Alliance. Find out where she came from. Old Ma said, no problem, leave it to me. Lu Chen smiled and reached for the wine pot. He started pouring wine into Old Ma's and his own cups. The next morning, Lu Chen and Old Ma woke up early. After tidying up, as usual, Lu Chen threw a large piece of demon beast meat to Atsu and sent the black dog away. These few days, Atsu lived like a deity. Every day, it either ate or slept. Apart from the fact that it couldn't drink, it was really a drunken life. After sending Atsu away, Lu Chen and Old Ma walked out together. Old Ma said to Lu Chen, today, I will go to Fuyunji to find hall leader Shuang and tell her about the recent events. I will also ask about the woman from yesterday. Lu Chen nodded and said, okay, go. But I'm afraid you won't get an answer soon. Don't rush back today. Do your work there. Old Ma looked at him and said, what about you? Where do you plan to go today? Are you going to find the next person on the list? Lu Chen hesitated and shook his head, no, I will stop for today. I feel that this matter is a bit strange. There seems to be something I don't understand. I need to think more about it. After a pause, he said to Old Ma, today, I will find a chance to go to the butcher's shop from yesterday to see if there is anything else I missed. That Rui Xiaotian's identity must be strange. Maybe that woman called Song Wenji knows something? Old Ma nodded and said, that's good. Be careful. After saying that, he left. Lu Chen watched Old Ma's back disappear into the busy street under the horse-washing bridge. After staring for a long time, he turned a corner and walked on another road. Of course, the butcher's shop from yesterday did not open for business today. This also made the ladies in the neighborhood, who usually liked to buy meat here, very disappointed. Before Lu Chen came, he was a little worried that these people might go to the butcher's shop to see what was going on. If they did, the situation inside would inevitably be exposed. In the lightning-fast battle yesterday, the mysterious butcher Rui Xiaotian suddenly triggered some traps, causing chaos and taking the opportunity to escape. Then, Lu Chen and Song Wenji couldn't catch up, and each had their own concerns, so they left one after another. However, those traps were set in the house. In fact, from the outside, at least there was nothing wrong with the butcher shop. This was what Lu Chen was worried about when he came over. However, to his surprise, although the butcher's shop was closed, it did not attract the attention of anyone, including the ladies in the neighborhood who came here every day to buy meat or to look at its face. Some of them walked to the door of the butcher's shop, and often stopped for a moment before turning around and walking away. They did not have any intention of knocking on the door to inquire. This also made Lu Chen feel a little surprised. After a while, when no one went over, Lu Chen walked out from a hidden corner on the opposite street, and then pretended to be passing by, walking in front of the butcher's shop. In the next moment, he suddenly frowned, as he found that there was a note pasted on the door of the butcher's shop, with a few lines written on it: "The owner's mother is seriously ill, and had to return overnight to take care of her. Our shop will be temporarily closed for a month, please forgive us for any inconvenience caused." The note was not particularly large, but it was still very conspicuous on the door. At the same time, the handwriting on it was neat and tidy, and it looked not bad. It was probably because of this note that the women who came over had to leave. Lu Chen did not stop in front of the butcher's shop, and even his eyes seemed to only glance at the note before walking over. An hour later, Lu Chen had already jumped in from a hidden wall at the back of the house without anyone noticing. The house was silent, and there was no movement at all. However, the messy debris scattered on the ground seemed to be telling the story of the sudden chaos yesterday. As for the original owner of the house, he was naturally nowhere to be found. Lu Chen stood in the small courtyard and thought about it, but he still could not find any clues from the magic power that Rui Xiaotian used when he escaped yesterday. He turned around and saw the peach tree from yesterday. The blooming peach blossoms were swaying in the spring breeze, and it seemed like nothing had changed. Compared to the mess around it, this peach tree was probably the only thing that was still neat and beautiful. Lu Chen stared at the blooming peach blossoms for a while, then walked over and entered Rui Xiaotian's bedroom. He was no stranger to this room. In fact, he had already searched this place carefully the day before and found a secret passage. However, apart from that, he did not find anything valuable. It seemed like he had more time today, so he searched more carefully than yesterday. However, as time passed, when he walked out of the bedroom again, what he found was exactly the same as the day before. However, Lu Chen did not look depressed. Instead, he seemed to be thinking about something. After pondering for a moment, he muttered to himself, "It's actually so clean. Could it be that he's also a shadow?" After standing at the door and thinking for a while, he walked towards the peach tree in the small courtyard. He had basically searched every place in this house, but Rui Xiaotian was so clean that he did not leave anything that could be used to trace his identity. Lu Chen even felt that if he had not seen Rui Xiaotian selling meat here with his own eyes yesterday, he might not have believed that this person lived here. However, there was one last place left. There were two secret passages in this house, one in the bedroom and the other under the peach tree. Song Wenji had been standing under this peach tree yesterday and did not leave. Lu Chen had always suspected that there was something strange about that place, so he had to search it thoroughly today. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, he had already walked under the peach tree. A breeze blew past and his clothes fluttered slightly. In a trance, he seemed to have returned to the season when peach blossoms were in full bloom in Qingshidang village. Chapter 417. Lu Chen stood silently under the peach tree for a while, and his eyes became clear. He looked at the peach tree from head to toe, circled around it, and then patted the trunk with his hand. Listening to the low and solid sound coming from under his hand, Lu Chen could not help but frown slightly. Of course, the peach tree was real. From the pink peach blossoms on the branches to the roots of the tree, it was a real peach tree that was growing well. However, there was indeed a secret passage hidden under the peach tree, which Lu Chen had discovered when he came over yesterday. The woman named Song Wenji had been standing there, intentionally or unintentionally, blocking the young butcher's escape route. In the end, Rui Xiaotian was forced to detonate the final mechanism and escape in the chaos. Since the peach tree was real, the mechanism that could control the underground secret passage should not be on the tree. Lu Chen pondered for a moment, then squatted down and began to search the ground carefully, ignoring the dirt on the ground and the various junk left by the explosion yesterday. He searched the ground very carefully and skillfully, as if he had done this kind of thing more than once before. On this quiet morning, in this abandoned house, a man was lying on the ground, carefully searching for something under the peach tree. This scene looked funny, and a little strange. However, this situation did not last for long. Lu Chen's body suddenly trembled, and he suddenly raised his head to look at the other end of the courtyard of the house. There was a trace of surprise and vigilance on his face. A figure gently flipped over from the wall over there and landed on the ground. In the next moment, she also saw Lu Chen, who was still lying on the ground in the courtyard, and she was stunned for a moment. A gentle breeze blew past, sweeping past the blooming peach blossoms, bringing with it a few pink petals that floated and fell with the wind, floating on the ground between them. They looked at each other for a moment, and then Lu Chen sighed and said, "Why are you here?" Standing under the wall was an exceptionally beautiful girl who even looked a little ethereal. It was White Lotus. At this moment, after the initial surprise, White Lotus quickly regained her composure. After smiling slightly, she walked over and stopped not far from Lu Chen. She smiled and said, "I'm here to look for you." Lu Chen clapped his hands and simply sat on the ground, too lazy to stand up. He said, "Why didn't you enjoy yourself in Xianxia on Sky Dragon Mountain and come down the mountain to look for me? There's nothing here that's worth your time. If you really have so much time, I think you might as well hang out with that perfected Lord Tianlan. As long as he's in a good mood one day and teaches you a few moves, it should be enough for you to enjoy." However, White Lotus looked like she didn't care. She giggled and threw away her usual cold fairy-like appearance. Instead, she had a bit of a temper that a girl of her age should have. After curling her lips, she said, "I'm too lazy to stay on that mountain. It's so boring all day. Not to mention other things, just in the main hall of Xianxia on the mountain, you have to be careful of anyone. No one knows when the big shots behind them will suddenly be pulled out. It's so annoying." "Is that so?" Lu Chen smiled. Unconsciously, he felt that the girl in front of him, whom he hadn't seen for years, was much more pleasing to the eye than he remembered. He nodded and said, "You don't know how lucky you are. Maybe the lifelong dream of others is to be favored by a perfected lord of the divine transformation realm like you." White Lotus snorted and said disapprovingly, "What's there to dream about? I don't think there's anything strange about it. What about you? If it were you, would you feel flattered by such favor?" Lu Chen was stunned for a moment. It seemed that he didn't expect White Lotus to ask such an abrupt question, which caught him off guard. After pondering for a moment, Lu Chen suddenly smiled and shook his head. "Well, I'll probably have the same reaction as you. I really didn't misjudge you." White Lotus looked very happy. She even clapped her hands and said with a smile, "Well, don't talk nonsense. What are you doing here now?" Lu Chen didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked, "How did you know I was here, and why did you come here?" White Lotus laughed and said, "I already expected you to ask this question." She said, "I met Old Ma this morning and found out from him." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Impossible. What kind of friendship does Old Ma have with you? It would be strange if he told you so clearly. If he told you to go to Kunlun Mountain thousands of miles away to find me, I might believe it more." White Lotus's face darkened. She said, "What? Is Old Ma such a bad person?" Lu Chen sternly said, yeah, rotten to the core, rotten to the core. White Lotus chuckled, looking like the beautiful peach blossoms beside her. Then she said with a smile, well, in fact, Martial Uncle Tianlan told me that I had nothing to do. If I wanted to, I could come to work with you. Old Ma also heard this, so he told me your whereabouts. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and then nodded. It seemed that he accepted White Lotus's words. Then, White Lotus glanced at the messy courtyard and rooms around and asked him what happened here. Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, but he still gave White Lotus a brief explanation of what had happened here. When he was done, he said to her, according to my previous experience, I can see that there should be a secret passage hidden under this place, and the switch should be nearby. I was looking for it here just now. White Lotus said, and took 2 steps forward. She looked a little curious and said, do you want me to help you? Lu Chen waved his hand and said, no need. After that, he stood up and continued to search nearby. White Lotus was not angry. She stood quietly behind him and found a stone to sit down. Looking at Lu Chen's back, a faint light flashed in her bright eyes. Lu Chen did not look back. After a moment, he suddenly said, how are you doing now? White Lotus shrugged and said, pretty good. At least no one on Sky Dragon Mountain dares to disrespect me. Maybe they all think that I will be the successor of Martial Uncle Tianlan in the future. Lu Chen looked back at her and said, isn't it? No. Lu Chen responded and turned back to continue searching. But after a while, he suddenly said, if it were me, I probably wouldn't treat you so well. White Lotus put her hands on her knees and looked at the man's back. She said, why? If it were you, what would you do to me? Lu Chen did not look back. He was still carefully searching the ground in front of him. At the same time, he said lightly, after all, you are the last disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan. If it were me, I probably would have found a way to let you die without knowing why. White Lotus's expression changed slightly. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly heard a low muffled sound, and then the ground under her feet trembled. After a moment, the ground under the peach tree suddenly sank, and then a narrow stone staircase extended downwards. Found it. Lu Chen stood up from the ground and said to White Lotus. Chapter 418. After discovering the entrance to the secret tunnel, Lu Chen did not enter it immediately. Instead, he stood outside the entrance and carefully observed it for a while. At the same time, he felt that there was a faint cold wind blowing out of the tunnel. He nodded slightly. Since there were signs of ventilation, it seemed that the tunnel below was not very shallow. There should be more to it. Lu Chen stood up and tidied up his clothes. He was about to go down when he suddenly saw White Lotus coming over from the corner of his eye. Lu Chen stopped and frowned. Why? Do you want to go down too? White Lotus said matter-of-factly, Martial Uncle Tianlan asked me to help you. Of course, I will follow you. Besides, I'm a little curious about what's down there. Let's go down and have a look. Lu Chen said, we haven't figured out the identity and origin of these people. Maybe there will be some danger. Everything is fine for you. You are a superior person. Why do you come and take such a risk? White Lotus smiled and looked at Lu Chen. Are you talking about those who might die a violent death at any time, and who don't even know why they died? Lu Chen glanced at her. White Lotus's expression did not change. It seemed that what she had just said had nothing to do with her. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. He suddenly sighed and turned to walk up the stone steps of the tunnel. At the same time, he said, be careful. If there is any danger, I won't protect you. White Lotus responded. It seemed that she did not take his words to heart. She just followed Lu Chen. The stone steps of the tunnel were made of very ordinary stone. There were no decorations on the walls on both sides of the tunnel. It was just that everything was square. Although it was simple and crude, it was relatively comfortable to walk. After walking down for a while, the light dimmed. However, Lu Chen was prepared for this. He took out a flint and wood torch from his arms and directly lit a torch. At this time, White Lotus, who was behind him, was a little surprised. She said in astonishment, "Do you actually carry a torch with you? How is that possible?" Lu Chen said, "Didn't I decide to explore this secret passage before I came here? So, I naturally brought a torch in case of emergency." White Lotus replied with an, "Oh," and did not say anything else. As the two of them continued to descend, the surroundings were soon shrouded in darkness. Only the light from the torches illuminated the surroundings. White Lotus had unknowingly approached Lu Chen. This passageway was much longer than Lu Chen had imagined. Similarly, it was also much larger than the secret passageway he had found in the bedroom. In fact, the secret passage in the bedroom was more like a hidden vault. After walking for a short distance, it was just a small storage room. Lu Chen had already searched that area that day, but there was nothing worth paying attention to in the underground storeroom. It was precisely because of this that Lu Chen shifted his attention to this place. The cool wind blowing in their faces was still there. The light on the torch swayed from time to time, but the flame was burning very steadily. Obviously, there seemed to be plenty of air in this passageway. As Lu Chen walked, his eyes were staring ahead with great vigilance. But at this moment, he suddenly heard White Lotus suddenly ask him, "Lu Chen, if you were Martial Uncle Tianlan, would you really want to kill me?" Lu Chen didn't even turn his head back as he continued walking forward. At the same time, he said, "You're living a good life now, and your status is respected as well. Normally, you're not even grounded. Since perfected Lord Tianlan is so good to you, do you think he will easily kill you?" White Lotus bit her lower lip and said in a low voice, "But you just said that Martial Uncle Tianlan is likely to want to kill me. Do you believe what I say?" Lu Chen stopped and looked back at White Lotus. White Lotus was stunned and said, "Why? You still can't believe me?" Lu Chen laughed and pointed to the front, saying, "Hurry up. I feel that the cold wind is a little stronger in front. We have probably reached the flat ground." White Lotus looked back and saw that the way they came was now covered by darkness. Even the entrance of the cave just now could not be seen. Her face was a little pale. She estimated in her heart that from the entrance of the cave to here, it was probably equivalent to walking down from the ground, and the vertical height was about 100 feet. This discovery surprised White Lotus a little, because a tunnel of such a scale in front of them must have consumed a lot of manpower and material resources, and it was almost impossible for an ordinary cultivator to do it. Especially in this busy street, if someone found out or complained about the indiscriminate harvesting and digging, they would often look for the Heavenly Dragon Mountain's true immortal alliance to uphold justice. What was Rui Xiaotian's background and identity? After walking for a while, the ground under their feet suddenly leveled out. Lu Chen whispered, "We are underground." As he said this, he raised the torch in his hand and began to illuminate the side. As the torch was raised high, the fire burned and gradually illuminated the surroundings. A moment later, Lu Chen and White Lotus suddenly exclaimed at almost the same time and exclaimed at the same time. With the help of the fire, Lu Chen and White Lotus saw where they were at the same time, as well as some of the surrounding areas. On the stone steps they came down just now, they could see that the stone steps and the stone walls next to them were almost newly built by outsiders. They were simple and meaningless. However, as they raised their torches, Lu Chen and Bai Lian suddenly realized that they had walked into a large underground passageway that was paved with huge stones. There were also some strange symbols carved into the walls on both sides, or perhaps it was more accurate to say that they were writing markings or something like that. Those characters, markings, and talisman inscriptions all looked very ancient. Even now, perhaps no one knew the meaning behind them. They did not understand why the predecessors had carved these things in this underground place. However, although they did not understand these words and marks, they still thought of something else from these things. Lu Chen did not say anything, but White Lotus suddenly said in a deep voice, "The relic, this is a part of the underground relic back then. Mount Tianlong was a spiritual mountain blessed on the Four River Plain. The land on and below the mountain were fertile and rich in spiritual energy. Perhaps there had been humans living here since a long time ago in ancient times. As for those ancient tribes, they lived here for a very long period of time before disappearing without a trace. Therefore, the relic had slowly become a ubiquitous place in the immortal city. A long time ago, this large-scale relic had been famous all over the world, but it was sealed by powerful humans in the following days. And today, Lu Chen and White Lotus had only casually opened the door under the peach blossom tree and actually found this secret passage. Who knew that it was deep underground and was actually connected to the relic? Lu Chen quietly looked at the situation in the surrounding passage. His eyes moved slightly, and after a moment, he suddenly pulled White Lotus and walked forward at the same time, saying, "Let's go take a look." Chapter 419. The Immortal City was where the headquarters of Xianxia was located. It was also known as the most prosperous city in the world. Other than the fact that there were as many people as ants and cultivators as many as dogs, the most famous thing was that there were many ruins left from ancient times in this huge city without city walls. Among them, the most famous and eye-catching were, of course, the statues of the four great mythological beasts of the East, West, South, and North. To this day, there was still not a fifth huge statue that could compare to the statues of the four great mythological beasts. It was said that in the previous generation of Xianxia, there was a great spiritual master who was proficient in this field who lived in the immortal city for 70 years just to study these ruins. Then, when he was dying, he left behind a shocking discovery. Not many people in the world knew what this discovery was, because it was said that only a few divine transformation realm perfected cultivators of the previous generation of Xianxia were present at that time. And when that spiritual master passed away, people only saw those divine transformation realm perfected cultivators walk out of the room with solemn expressions. Then, Xianxia buried that spiritual master with the highest ceremony. But from then on, no one ever heard of this matter again, and none of those divine transformation stage perfected monarchs ever mentioned anything about it again. This was a legend that was widely spread among the people of the immortal city and even among the cultivators of the vast land of the divine land. It had not been extinguished for many years, and on this basis, there were also all kinds of guesses, variations, and even all kinds of stories. In the end, it was because those powerful perfected cultivators of Xianxia suddenly took action many years ago. They valiantly and forcefully sealed the ancient ruins under the immortal city. At the same time, they also buried the legend of those treasures that had been passed down for thousands of years in people's imagination. To this day, there were still countless people yearning for the mysterious and illusory treasures under the immortal city. However, the seal back then was cast by a few perfected lords of the divine transformation realm at their peak. The power was simply unimaginable. At least, after so many years, no one was able to take a peek at the true core secret of the underground relic. These things were well known in the human cultivation world and were not secrets. Therefore, when Lu Chen and White Lotus walked into the tunnel that looked like an ancient relic, they almost thought of these things at the same time. The patterns on the wall were obscure and distorted. At first glance, Lu Chen felt that they were somewhat similar to the totem patterns of the barbarians in the southern wilderness. But after careful observation, he found that there were many obvious differences between the two. At least for the time being, Lu Chen did not sense any dark power similar to the barbarian totem from the runes on the walls. The torch was still burning. White Lotus and Lu Chen's footsteps echoed in the wide passage. Looking at the neat stones on both sides, they walked forward for about 5 or 6 zhang. Suddenly, they stopped at the same time. The darkness in the tunnel was temporarily dispelled by the fire, but the tunnel in front of them came to an abrupt end. It looked like a large pile of rubble had collapsed from the dome, directly blocking the tunnel. There was no path ahead. Moreover, all the signs looked like a dead end. White Lotus let out a low and slightly disappointed cry, saying, "What's going on? It's blocked." Lu Chen walked forward, waved the torch in his hand and carefully looked at the pile of rubble in front of him. Very soon, he found that it was tightly blocked, not even a gap. Moreover, there were layers upon layers of rubble in front of them. He was afraid that in the depths of this tunnel, the number of stones that had collapsed was not just a few, so there was no possibility of going further. He sighed, turned around and said to White Lotus, "This is probably a corner at the edge of the underground ruins of the Immortal City. There are still some remnants outside the sealing spell, but it seems that we can't go further in." White Lotus nodded. Obviously, although she was not old, she had long known about the legend of the ancient ruins of the Immortal City. However, only the cultivators in the cultivation world would not be interested in the most mysterious, most magnificent and most precious treasure in the world. Therefore, her face also showed a little regret. She muttered, as if she was a little angry, and complained like a little girl, saying, "Ai, if only we could go in and take a look." Lu Chen smiled and first gestured for her to go back together. At the same time, he said, "This tunnel was left behind by the mysterious butcher. Obviously, he must have been here before. If he had found anything, he would have gone in long ago." White Lotus shrugged. It seemed that she did not have much objection to what Lu Chen said. However, perhaps she was still a little displeased with the man beside her, or perhaps she was not convinced, so she casually replied, "That's not necessarily true. Maybe he's not as smart as us?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "That's right. But actually, the treasure in the ancient ruins is only a legend. No one knows what is actually inside. If after you go in, you don't find the treasure, and suddenly a large group of vicious and strange monsters suddenly jump out and directly eat a white and beautiful little girl like you, it would be too late for you to cry at that time." "Humph." White Lotus snorted. There was a look of dissatisfaction on her face. She said, "The legend of the ancient ruins has been around for so many years. You have never entered it before. How can you say that it's fake?" Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "I didn't say that it's fake. I just feel that there are many loopholes in the story. It doesn't make sense. There are many problems." White Lotus's eyebrows twitched. She was a little more curious. She said, "Oh, tell me." Lu Chen glanced at her, turned around and walked forward. He said, "I'm too lazy to say." "You." White Lotus was instantly angered. She fiercely clenched her teeth and chased after Lu Chen and grabbed his sleeve. She said angrily, "Tell me clearly." "I'm too lazy to say anything. I think you're dissatisfied with me." "Of course I'm dissatisfied with you," Lu Chen said. White Lotus was stunned again. It seemed that she didn't expect this man to be so direct and ruthless. After a moment of daze, the expression on her face eased a little. There was even a strange light in her eyes. She looked at Lu Chen for a moment and softened her voice. She said, "You're such a strange person. All right then. What exactly do you have that you're dissatisfied with? Can you tell me?" "You wanted to kill my dog in the past," Lu Chen said. White Lotus frowned and said, "It's just a useless dog. Is it worth making a fuss about?" Lu Chen said seriously, "Although Atsu is lazy, ugly, and gluttonous, it's not useless." White Lotus waved her hand impatiently and said, all right. Anyway, it's your dog. It has nothing to do with me. But that was a few years ago. Now that I've met you, I didn't come up to fight and kill that dog. As a man, don't be so narrow-minded." Lu Chen sneered and said, "Miss, you're used to being arrogant. You bullied others in the past, and now you can casually call others to let it go? Even if it's a dog, it's still my dog. I'm not happy." White Lotus was furious. She spat and said angrily, "Who do you think you are? How dare you talk to me like this? Isn't it just a dog? I killed it when I wanted to. What do you want? Also, do you think I still have to rely on you? Get lost." After saying that, she turned around and strode forward, leaving Lu Chen alone. Lu Chen looked at her back as she walked into the darkness and shouted, "Do you want a torch? Save the torch and burn yourself to death." White Lotus shouted at the last moment before she walked into the darkness. Then, she could no longer be seen. Lu Chen looked at the darkness. After a moment of silence, he suddenly shook his head and slowly turned around. However, he turned his head to look in the direction of the pile of rocks that had blocked his path. His eyes slightly narrowed. Chapter 420. Bang! A muffled sound suddenly came from the passage left behind by the ancient ruins. The torch in Lu Chen's hand suddenly fell from his hand and fell to the ground without warning. It bounced a few times and rolled a short distance to the side. The flame was still burning, but it quickly became smaller during the rolling period, gradually becoming a weak flame, until finally, after twisting a few times, it quietly extinguished. Darkness returned here again. Lu Chen stood in the ancient underground passage without any light and closed his eyes, as if he was perceiving something. After a while, he slowly opened his eyes again, but at this time, there was a faint black flame slowly burning in the depths of his pupils. He also turned around and walked into the passage. The darkness covered all the routes, but Lu Chen seemed to be able to see everything in the darkness. Without any hesitation, he walked steadily and firmly, and then once again returned to the passage blocked by stones. He stretched out his hand in the darkness and touched the huge cold and hard stones. The rough feeling came from his fingertips, and then came the uneven and cracked stone gaps. He carefully groped, and no one knew what he felt. Behind him, the darkness also seemed to be silent, silently surrounding his figure, as if staring at what this strange figure was doing. Bai Lian jumped out from the tunnel with an angry look on her face. She cursed under her breath, but it seemed like she was still angry. She kicked a broken piece of wood in the air and flew in an arc before hitting a pillar on the opposite side of the corridor. Then it fell to the ground. Bai Lian looked at Bai Lian and 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 Bai Lian. White Lotus, who was usually quiet and cold like a little fairy, had long lost her interest in pretending at the moment. She angrily paced back and forth a few times on the side of the tunnel. The more she thought about it, the more annoyed she became. Suddenly she spat at the bottom of the tunnel and said, "Stinky man, what are you proud of? If it weren't for that damn baldy Tianlan who insisted that I come to help you, do you think I would be willing to come? Ever since Master died, the people I've met are getting weirder and weirder." After cursing for a while, White Lotus's anger subsided a little, but her expression was still ugly. She didn't care about anything else. With a cold snort, she turned around and walked out. It seemed that her temper had flared up and she didn't care about anything else. She didn't want to stay here any longer, and she didn't want to see Lu Chen again. He quickly walked past the small courtyard, arrived at the corridor, and then walked towards the main door. The house behind him was quiet, only a gust of spring wind blowing from afar, rustling the blooming peach trees, adding a little quiet rustling to the quiet time here. White Lotus's footsteps slowed down. When she reached the door, she stopped. For some reason, she didn't reach out to open the door. Her beautiful and delicate brows slightly furrowed, and the anger on her face unknowingly dissipated. Instead, she revealed a puzzled expression. "Something's not right," White Lotus muttered to herself. After a while, she slowly turned around. Her eyes were clear and bright, and with a somewhat thoughtful expression, she stared at the entrance of the tunnel under the peach tree in the courtyard. The pitch-black darkness covered Lu Chen's figure, and the black flame in his eyes didn't leak out at all, allowing the black fire in his eyes to gradually grow bigger and bigger. His hand had been groping on the wall of ruins formed by the rubble until his palms suddenly touched a flat broken stone. It was an inconspicuous place among the rubble, but after groping in the dark for a long time, Lu Chen almost immediately felt that this place was different. This stone had a nearly round surface and a smooth surface in sharp contrast to the rough surface of the surrounding rubble. It gave people the feeling that it was part of a pillar, or something made of a particularly smooth stone a long time ago. The black fire in his eyes flickered, as if he was a little hesitant at that moment, but after a while, Lu Chen lowered his head, but placed one side of his cheek and ear on this round stone. A cold feeling instantly seeped into his face, causing Lu Chen to frown. But he didn't retreat, and instead slightly narrowed his eyes, carefully listening to something. Behind that stone, What was it? What was in the depths of this ancient ruin? Perhaps there was nothing. Other than the cold feeling seeping out from the stone, he didn't feel anything out of the ordinary. Behind this cold stone, perhaps there were even more empty stone caves. There was no movement, no sound, everything seemed to be deathly silent. Lu Chen silently waited for a while, but still didn't find anything. He could only prepare to get up, but at this moment, within his chest, his heart suddenly jumped. If there was light at this moment, he could clearly see that in this man's eyes, the two balls of black fire, at that moment, seemed to be startled by a sudden gust of wind, twisting and distorting, only returning to normal after a while. Lu Chen's eyes suddenly lit up, as if he felt something. He couldn't help but stretch out his finger to knock on the surface of the stone twice. Pa! Pa! The sounds were low and clear, but this time, there was no response. It was as if the sudden palpitation he felt was just an illusion in the darkness. Lu Chen tried a few times, but there was no reaction. In the end, Lu Chen was finally at his wits' end, and slowly stood up. Until now, he still couldn't confirm whether there was anything strange behind this wall of ruins, and if there was, what strange thing would it be? But just now, the power behind the distant stone wall that suddenly resonated with the power of the black fire in his body, made him faintly feel that there seemed to be some secret hidden here. Yes, from the beginning until the end, the ancient words and talisman markings on the walls didn't affect him in the slightest. Instead, it was the mysterious thing behind the wall of ruins that aroused his interest. But even so, at this moment, he seemed to have walked into a dead end. Thinking about it, those deity transformation stage true monarchs all had earth-shattering magical powers, casting spells to seal these ruins for hundreds of years without any problems. Of course, it was impossible for them to be shaken like him. Perhaps, there was nothing at all, and it was just a misunderstanding. Lu Chen sighed, straightened his body, and wanted to leave, but after a moment of thought, he casually stretched out his fingers, and two black flames surged out from his fingertips, carrying a trace of indescribable and strange aura, and just like that, he knocked on the stone twice. Pa pa. Like a sudden knock on the door in a quiet afternoon, it echoed in this passage. There was no reaction. Lu Chen turned around, walked into the darkness, and quickly disappeared. After an unknown amount of time, suddenly in this darkness, in a certain corner of the wall of ruins, on a certain stone, a soft and weak voice suddenly sounded, Pa pa. Pa pa. Chapter 421. White Lotus stared at the entrance of the tunnel under the blossoming peach tree for a while, her expression fluctuating, but the initial anger had completely disappeared, leaving behind only a pondering expression. After a while, she suddenly straightened her expression, as if she had made up her mind. She strode towards the entrance. Just that, when she reached the entrance, she suddenly heard a burst of footsteps below. A moment later, Lu Chen's figure walked out from the darkness, following the stone steps to the ground. A breeze blew, white petals with a tinge of pink floated down from the tree, landing on their shoulders and lapels. They looked at each other. Lu Chen was the first to speak. I thought you had already left. White Lotus looked at his eyes. The corner of her eyes swept over the black hole on the ground. After a moment of silence, she asked, why did you take so long to come up? The road was too dark, not easy to walk. White Lotus glanced at his palm, said, where is your torch? Oh, I burned it halfway and suddenly ran out of fire, so I had to throw it down there. Lu Chen said. The corner of White Lotus's mouth slightly twitched, but she did not say anything more. After a while, she turned around, silently walked to the main door, opened the door and walked out. What we are doing now, do you really understand in your heart? Deep in the alley of Shima Xiao, Old Ma and Lu Chen sat on the grass in the courtyard, looking at the already dark sky. Behind the faint dark clouds were even more twinkling stars, and then suddenly asked Lu Chen this question. It was rare that Atsu did not eat meat in big mouthfuls, nor did it sleep soundly, only quietly lying beside Lu Chen. Probably it also felt that this was a rare time to spend with Lu Chen, at least for the past few days. Lu Chen used his hand to gently stroke the fur on top of Atsu's head, faintly said, of course I know. Even though I didn't like that damn Baldy, we were still on the same page when it came to dealing with the devil cult. He came up with a plan, and I thought it might work, so I helped him do it. Old Ma glanced at him, sighed, and said nothing. Lu Chen's hand moved from Atsu's head to its stomach. After the familiar warm feeling, he felt that Atsu seemed to have grown fatter than before. It was no wonder. He ate, drank, and slept like a pig every day. No matter what, he would become fat. He patted Atsu's stomach lightly and said, he said that to destroy the source of belief of the devil cult, the first thing we have to do is to find the few divine objects in their hands. Some of the divine objects must be in the immortal city. So, what we have to do now is to find those rats hiding in the dark corners of this city, right? Old Ma frowned and said, but we found a few people, and none of them seemed to have anything to do with the devil cult. Lu Chen shook his hand and said, that's not right. What do you mean? It's not that they have nothing to do with the devil cult, it's that we haven't found any evidence of them having anything to do with the devil cult. Among these people, some of their whereabouts are unknown, and some of them were killed before we could find them. We still don't know what secrets they have behind them. After a pause, Lu Chen glanced at Old Ma and said, did you go to Fuyunji to ask about this? Old Ma nodded and said, I've talked to Hall Master Shuang. She admitted that she was the one who submitted the list to Supreme Tianlan, but she also said that there are no traitors among her subordinates. At least, most of them are loyal and reliable people. However, she will investigate this matter in private. Speaking of this, Old Ma hesitated and said, why don't you ask him the next time you see him? It's no use. Lu Chen said straightforwardly, what kind of person is that damn Baldy? He has so many big and small things in his hands all day long. It's impossible for him to check this list one by one. At most, he will ask his subordinates to do it. It's almost the same as asking us to do things for him. But in Fuyunji, someone must have leaked the secret. Old Ma snorted as if he had already expected this. He said, we've already talked about this a few years ago. The true Immortal Alliance's halls are like sieves now. They're leaking like crazy. I thought it would be better in Fuyunji, but now it looks like it's almost the same. Lu Chen smiled and said, anyway, we still have to do what we have to do. Since Rui Xiaotian ran away and we can't find him, let's continue to look for the people behind him. Old Ma nodded. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, by the way, I got some information about the woman you asked me to investigate the other day. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and said, who is she? What's her background? Old Ma said, there is indeed a woman named Song Wenji in the Heavenly Law Hall of the Immortal Allies. She has a powerful background. She is the adopted daughter of the highly respected Immortal Jianghu. Lu Chen was stunned and said, the adopted daughter of Immortal Jianghu? Old Ma nodded and said, yes. Because Immortal Jianghu has no children, he values his only adopted daughter very much and tries to cultivate her. It can be said that she is one of the most popular young people in the Heavenly Law Hall. Lu Chen thought for a moment and suddenly laughed. He said, it seems that Immortal Jianghu doesn't like that damn Baldy. Old Ma also smiled and said, that's true. That lord has indeed disliked us for many years. Lu Chen waved his hand and said with a trace of laziness, who cares? Let these big shots fight for these trivial matters. We just need to do our own things. He put his hands under his head and closed his eyes. He mumbled something. Old Ma didn't hear it clearly and asked, what did you say? Lu Chen closed his eyes and said, I hope the person we are looking for tomorrow is still alive. In the spring of this year, the weather in the immortal city where Zhengxiameng was located was pleasant. Hundreds of flowers were in full bloom. Not only peach blossoms, but also countless beautiful flowers bloomed in this season, decorating the city extraordinarily beautiful. And at this time, in Zhengxiameng, which had always been calm, at least on the surface, for many years, a piece of strange news suddenly came out. The 5 devils of the Blood-Wing sect of East Sea that Zhengxiameng had suppressed a while ago, had suddenly abandoned the darkness and entered the light. All of them had been absorbed by Zhengxiameng. However, among them, 2 first surrendered to Immortal Tianlan, while the other 3 had inexplicably joined the heavenly law hall of another deity stage immortal, Jianghu. For a moment, everyone inside and outside Xianxianmeng cast sidelong glances at each other. There seemed to be some faint tension between these 2 big shots who stood at the peak of the human cultivation world. And in the surging undercurrents, there was another matter that was not so obvious, although perhaps this matter itself was much more important. Immortal Guyu, another big shot who was in charge of the Starry Hall, in Xianxianmeng, suddenly sent a secret letter to the other 5 deity stage immortals in Xianxianmeng one day, inviting them to the Starry Hall for a discussion. It had been many, many years since all 6 deity stage immortals in Xianxianmeng had gathered together. Chapter 422. When night fell, it was quiet both inside and outside the bedroom. The window opposite the bed was half open, and a faint beam of starlight shone in from outside, falling into the dark room. Lu Chen and the black dog lay down, but they were not asleep yet. Because Atsu was growing bigger and bigger, a normal bed could no longer accommodate it to sleep with Lu Chen. Therefore, Atsu had been sleeping on the ground these days. But even on the ground, Atsu slept close to the bed. Its huge body was already higher than the edge of the bed, so Lu Chen could easily touch its body and head if he stretched out his hand. Now, Lu Chen gently placed one hand on Atsu's back, lying on his side. After a long silence in the dark, he suddenly said, "Atsu, it seems that the message that your serious dad asked me to pass on is not going to be easy." Atsu raised its head, and its huge head immediately went over the edge of the bed. Its 2 bright and deep eyes glanced at Lu Chen. Deep in the depths of its eyes was the faint green light that would appear whenever it was in the dark. To be honest, the current Atsu, no matter how one looked at it, was no longer the pathetic and weak mud of the past. Its body was abnormally tall and strong, its fangs were as sharp as knives, and the claws on its 4 limbs could even cut through iron. When its head appeared beside the bed, it looked more like an extremely terrifying monster, making people feel a kind of soul-stirring fear. However, of course, Lu Chen was not afraid of Atsu. He kept patting Atsu's head with his hand, and the Atsu, which seemed to be much stronger than this human, was also very close to Lu Chen. It seemed to enjoy his touch, rubbing its head against his palm from time to time, and occasionally sticking out its tongue to lick him. Unlike Atsu's dad in the Great Snow Mountain, Lu Chen could not speak the human language even though Atsu looked very strong and fierce. Therefore, most of the time, Lu Chen could only talk to himself. But it seemed that he was already used to it. Therefore, after a while, Lu Chen continued talking to himself. He did not wait for Atsu's reply or any other reaction. He said, "That old man Tai whose status is too high. It's really difficult for us to meet him. If we go to him honestly, we'll definitely be thrown out. But if we use the identity of the dead Baldy to meet him, of course, we can't do that either. There'll be too many troubles in the future." Atsu's head shrank a little, and then it lay down on its 2 front legs. With the help of the faint starlight, the black dog's expression did not change at all, as if what Lu Chen said had nothing to do with it, or the task that its father Sirius had instructed it to do in the past had nothing to do with it. Lu Chen also saw Atsu's reaction, and he could not help but laugh. He scolded, and then said with a smile, "This is something that your old man has instructed you to do, why don't you care at all?" Atsu yawned lazily, as if it was too lazy to even bark. Lu Chen did not care about it. After a moment of silence, he said slowly, "Actually, there's another layer of trouble in this matter. Perhaps it's even more troublesome than the previous 2 problems." He glanced at Atsu, lowered his voice, and said, "Your father Sirius asked me to pass on a message, to ask that old man Tai Hu to return the leaf that he borrowed years ago. I've thought about this sentence many times, and I've always felt that it's not quite right. Tai Hu is a deity transformation stage true monarch, and Sirius is an ancient species, one of the most powerful and terrifying giant beasts in the world. So, what kind of leaf was it that was worth them making a deal? And after so many years, Sirius still refused to give up, and even sent people to pursue it?" Lu Chen sighed, and said to Atsu, "Why do I have a feeling that maybe it wasn't just borrowing that year?" Atsu let out a low cry, and for a moment, no one knew what it meant. Lu Chen stroked its head, thought for a moment, and said, if that thing is really that important, or if that old man Tai who has a bad heart and doesn't want to return it, do you think he'll directly slap me to death if I go up to him? Atsu ignored him, and looked a little sleepy, as if it was about to fall asleep. Lu Chen glanced at it, shook his head, and scolded jokingly. He turned over and lay flat on the bed. After a moment of silence, he muttered to himself, forget it, let's put this matter off for now, and see if there's a suitable opportunity in the future. Anyway, Sirius didn't give me any deadline. He closed his eyes, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, as if he was about to fall asleep. But after a while, he softly muttered to himself, leaf? In this world, there's a leaf that can attract the attention of a deity transformation stage true monarch? Perhaps, there's only one. His voice gradually faded, and gradually disappeared into the darkness. He didn't know if it was because Lu Chen had pissed her off that day, but White Lotus hadn't come looking for him for the past few days. Although Lu Chen couldn't ask for more, he was still a little surprised, because according to his understanding of White Lotus, she should not be such an irritable and impulsive person. However, without White Lotus, it was certainly more convenient for Lu Chen and Old Ma to act, even if White Lotus was now a trusted follower of Supreme Tianlan. However, neither Lu Chen nor Old Ma really or openly discussed this matter, but they had always ignored or disapproved of the rumor that Supreme Tianlan would accept White Lotus as his personal disciple. Today, they were going out again. As usual, Lu Chen went to the warehouse, grabbed a large piece of demon beast meat, and threw it to Atsu. Atsu happily picked it up, ran to the grass, and gnawed on it. Then Lu Chen and Old Ma left. Before going out, Lu Chen looked back and saw that Atsu was lying in the grass eating meat happily as usual. Logically speaking, after it finished eating this piece of superior demon beast meat, it should go back to its room to sleep. Lu Chen closed the door with a smile, and then walked forward with Old Ma. Today was the day they went to find the new person on the list. Behind them, the house was getting farther and farther away. In the small courtyard of the house, it was very quiet inside and outside. The only sound was probably the harsh sound of meat chewing in this quiet atmosphere. Atsu obviously didn't feel anything about the atmosphere or the scenery. It just wanted to eat the delicious meat in front of its mouth. After an unknown period of time, a figure suddenly landed lightly from mid-air and stood in the courtyard. Atsu stood up almost immediately and let out a low roar. The hair on its back stood up, and its fierce and terrifying posture was like that of a ferocious demon beast, causing people to be intimidated. However, after a moment, the roar suddenly stopped. Atsu tilted its head and looked at the figure in front of it. A trace of surprise appeared in its eyes. It was a young girl dressed in white. Her appearance was exceptionally beautiful. It was White Lotus. She walked forward, looked at Atsu, smiled, and even waved her hand, saying to Atsu, "Long time no see, Atsu." Of course, it was impossible for Atsu and this girl to not have seen each other for a long time. At the very least, they had met outside the immortal city. However, although Atsu was now fierce and terrifying, and was much taller than White Lotus when standing up, it still had some fear towards White Lotus. It stood up and let out a low roar. Its pair of huge eyes stared straight at White Lotus, as if it didn't dare to relax at all. On the contrary, White Lotus looked much more relaxed. She first looked around, then nodded and said, "It's a good place to live." She then looked at the piece of demon beast meat in front of Atsu and frowned slightly. Then, she smiled and said, "Eating so well, Lu Chen really cares about you." Atsu didn't have any reaction. White Lotus just looked at Atsu and suddenly extended a hand to wave at it. Then, she smiled warmly and said, "Atsu, come here. I'll take you to a very fun place." Chapter 423. I heard that there has been some movement on Mount Tianlong recently. Lu Chen asked Old Ma while walking on the street. Old Ma shook his head and said, "It's not really a movement. It's just that the master of the Starry Temple, Guyu, suddenly sent a secret letter to the other 5 perfected immortals. No one knows what the content is, but I heard that the other 5 perfected immortals have agreed to go. Lu Chen thought for a while and said, I remember that they haven't had a gathering like this for a long time, right? Yes, it's been many years, Old Ma said. I also don't remember seeing them gather together. Lu Chen was silent for a while, and there was a glimmer in the depths of his eyes. Then he asked Old Ma, don't you think it's a little strange? The true immortal alliance is so big, but it's all under the control of the 6 of them. To put it bluntly, it's not an exaggeration to say that the entire human cultivation world is under their control. But why haven't they gathered to discuss anything for so many years? Old Ma touched his chin, as if he was a little speechless about this. After a while, he said, maybe the 6 perfected immortals think that they can control the world without a gathering? Towards the end, he seemed to feel that what he said was a little unreasonable. He could only smile and shake his head, saying, well, who knows? Anyway, at the level of perfected immortals of Huashan realm, they are half human and half god, almost the same as immortals. So it's different from what we think. Lu Chen said expressionlessly, perfected immortals of Huashan realm are also human. Old Ma was shocked and turned to look at him, only to see that Lu Chen was looking straight ahead without any expression on his face, as if what he said just now was just a casual remark. He hesitated for a while, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he stopped and shook his head without saying anything. At this moment, Lu Chen suddenly asked him again, do you know when the gathering of those old men is scheduled? Old Ma said, oh, it's not a secret. It should be today. After all, this is the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng on Mount Celestial Dragon, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Moreover, the 6 of them are all big shots with a slight move, so it's hard for them to escape the eyes and ears of others. Lu Chen grunted. After a moment of silence, he suddenly smiled and said to Old Ma, to be honest, this is a rare scene. Most people in the world would find it extremely difficult to meet even one deity transformation perfected monarch in their lifetime, let alone 6 of them. Old Ma laughed and nodded. That's true. Now that you mention it, I also want to watch from the Starry Hall. Lu Chen didn't say anything and smiled. He looked up and saw that on this day, the sun had just risen, and the rays of light were shining down from the sky. The huge white tiger statue occupied the city, looking down at the people, bathed in the golden light, looking unusually majestic. For some reason, Lu Chen always had a feeling that the eyes of the white tiger statue seemed to be staring at him from afar. In the courtyard of the house deep in the alley of Horse Washing Bridge, White Lotus's beautiful and refined face had a smile. She looked harmless and incomparably beautiful. Anyone who saw her would have a feeling of love and adoration. Except for the black dog in front of her. The black dog seemed to be very vigilant towards this beautiful girl. Although for some reason, it didn't make any aggressive moves, but it was obvious that Atsu didn't have any intention of being close to White Lotus. It slowly stood up and stared at White Lotus. Its head and shoulders were slightly tilted down, looking like a beast about to pounce on its prey. It could be said that it was defending itself, but it also had a hint of warning in it. White Lotus waited in place for a while. She saw that the huge black dog was still vigilantly looking at her as if it was facing a great enemy. It didn't have the slightest intention of being obedient. The corner of her mouth twitched, as if she was secretly gritting her teeth. Then she snorted and said, I say, do you really have to go so far? It's been a few years since that incident on Kunlun Mountain. Even your master didn't shout to kill me all day long. You little bastard, you actually bear a grudge? Atsu stared at her. Although it couldn't speak, it made a low growl from its throat. At the same time, its sharp white fangs slowly opened and closed, as if it was still showing off. White Lotus rubbed the space between her eyebrows with her fingers. She seemed to be a little annoyed. She looked at the ground from the corner of her eyes and saw the half-eaten demon beast meat on the ground. She sighed and said, why don't you come with me and do me a favor? I'll give you better demon beast meat later. What do you think? Atsu blinked and snorted. It had an uninterested look on its face. If it was described in human terms, it would probably be snorting disdainfully. White Lotus was taken aback. She seemed to have a whole new level of respect for this dog. She said in surprise, "You're not greedy anymore?" Atsu glanced at her, and then looked at a place outside the courtyard. There was a large room called the warehouse. It had followed Lu Chen in there. The demon beast meat filled the room like a small mountain. Trying to cheat a dog with this kind of demon beast meat? That's not going to work. Atsu glanced at the demon beast meat on the ground. It seemed that it didn't want to pay attention to this woman. It was ready to continue eating its meal. Pa! There was a muffled sound as Bai Lian threw a moderate-sized rock at Atsu. The rock bounced a few times on the grass in the courtyard and rolled for a while before stopping not far from Atsu's head. Atsu was startled and his body shrank back a little. He then immediately bared his teeth at White Lotus and made a fierce face. It looked as if he was saying, "If you provoke me again, don't blame me for eating you up." To be honest, when paired with his ridiculously tall body, it really was a little scary. However, White Lotus obviously didn't have much fear of this black dog. She just waved her hand indifferently, then pointed at the stone on the ground and said, don't rush, look at that thing." Roar. Atsu stared at White Lotus warily. After a while, its pair of dog eyes glanced down. It saw that the stone on the ground was about the size of a palm. One side was flat, but the other side was uneven and full of potholes. At this moment, the flat side was upside down on the ground, and it looked like it was dug out from somewhere. Atsu took a few glances and found nothing unusual. Just when it was about to raise its head and get angry at White Lotus, it saw that White Lotus waved her hand impatiently and said, turn it over. Atsu hesitated for a moment, stretched out a dog paw to lift the stone, and turned it over. Suddenly, its eyes focused on the stone, and for a moment, it couldn't move its eyes away. From the moment it turned the stone over, White Lotus had been staring at Atsu's expression. At this moment, she finally showed a happy expression. She couldn't help but gently clench her fist, took 2 steps forward, and said, "How is it? Does it look familiar?" Atsu stared at the stone without saying a word. On the flat side of the stone, there was a complicated and twisted strange picture. The pattern seemed to be somewhat similar to the totem of the barbarians in the far south. White Lotus squatted down not far in front of it. Atsu raised its head and looked at her with a puzzled expression. White Lotus pointed at the stone and said to Atsu, "I dug this thing out from the wall of a place. Well, although it is an ancient relic, who cares? As long as I am happy, it is fine. You are interested in this thing, right? Isn't the secret method of blood feeding something from the barbarians?" Atsu was silent for a moment, and suddenly whispered twice. It didn't sound like there was any hostility anymore. White Lotus smiled, seemed to be very satisfied, and also a little proud. She even stretched out her hand to try to touch Atsu's head. Atsu dodged, but in the end, it didn't retreat. White Lotus nodded and said, "Well, since you are also interested in these things, let's go and have a look together." Anne. She stood up, and her eyes flashed slightly. She whispered, "Also help me to carefully search for the secret in that hole." Chapter 424. Do you think we'll alert the enemy this time? Old Ma asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked at him and said, "What do you mean?" "The butcher who escaped." Old Ma said, "We went there, but we didn't catch him. Instead, we let him escape. Until now, we still don't know where he is. If that guy really has something to do with the devil's sect, it'll be difficult." Lu Chen was silent for a while, then said, "It's also possible that he has nothing to do with the devil's sect. At least, I carefully searched the meat shop inside and out, and didn't find anything related to the devil's sect." Old Ma said, "Could it be that he's also a veteran, so everything is very clean and secretive?" Lu Chen shook his head slightly, and didn't answer his question. Instead, he changed the topic and said, "It's that Song Wenji's fault. If she didn't suddenly interfere, and I was the one who set it up, the two of us would have worked together, and that person wouldn't have been able to escape." Old Ma shrugged his shoulders, and didn't say anything. Lu Chen said, "How's the hunting for the butcher going?" Old Ma said, "I've already told the situation to Fiyunji. Hall leader Shuang has also ordered to track down that person. With their strength, it's still possible to catch that guy." Lu Chen nodded and said, "That's good." As they spoke, they had already passed the long street, and turned into a relatively quiet street. Finally, they stopped in front of a very ordinary-looking tavern. One is a gardener, the other is a butcher. What is this person now? Old Ma looked at the tavern with some emotion, and his expression was somewhat complicated. Perhaps he was thinking of a tavern like this a long time ago. "A chef," Lu Chen said to him, and then stepped into the tavern. After thousands of years of development, Zhengxianmeng had already occupied the peak of the human cultivation world in the vast land of the Divine Land, and had stayed there for a long time. As everyone knew, there was never a selfless saint in the world. Even if there was, it was a legend that lived in people's imagination, passed down from generation to generation, respected by everyone, and no one would learn it. Even if there was a Huashan deity whose cultivation was unbelievably high, and many people in the world regarded them as immortals, in the end, they were just people. The true immortal alliance ruled the cultivation world half in the light and half in the dark. Naturally, there were unimaginably huge benefits. Therefore, there were also countless people fighting in the true immortal alliance, both in the light and in the dark. Thus, there were countless large and small factions. However, in the cultivation world, the strong were respected. All the factions, in the end, the most prominent one was still the mountain forces led by the 6 Huashan deity cultivators. Among the big and small mountain forces in Zhengxianmeng, the Starry Hall was a very aloof, or it could be said that it was a very low-key faction. Basically, in most of the conflicts for interests in Zhengxianmeng, people from the Starry Hall faction could not be seen. A long time ago in ancient times, this would probably be praised as a kind of sage-like and immortal style. But in this era where all living beings were bustling with activity, who didn't want fame and who didn't want profit? So the Starry Hall, which was once prominent in the early years, was now no longer as glorious as it was in the past. But in any case, no matter how low-key it was, there was still a Guyu deity in the Starry Hall. Such a strong person was enough to be respected, so people did not say the word low-key. When mentioning the Starry Hall, it was said that people in this place were obsessed with cultivation and were very detached from the interests of mortals. It was just that after being low-key or aloof for so many years, recently the Starry Hall suddenly made a move, which shocked many people in the immortal allies. After so many years, the 6 Huashan deity cultivators of Zhengxianmeng were actually invited to a gathering from this place, which was really unexpected. There was almost no one in the world who would not give face to a Huashan deity cultivator. The only person who had the confidence to do so was probably also a Huashan deity cultivator. But on this day, it was clear that the other 5 Huashan deity cultivators of Zhengxianmeng were very respectful to the Guyu deity cultivator of the Starry Hall. They all put down the important things at hand and the trivial things that piled up like a mountain, and found time to come to the Starry Hall. The Starry Hall was an unusually majestic and spacious hall. It looked even taller than a small hill. In addition to its majestic appearance, there was a dazzling star map engraved on the dome of the Starry Hall, which was filled with countless stars. Every time night came, the lights in the hall would be extinguished, and the stars carved with strange gems would light up one by one, decorating the hall with light, and it was very beautiful. This was a very famous wonder in the main hall of Zhengxianmeng, but it was very difficult for ordinary people to see, even for Huashan deity cultivators, because of their status. They usually would not come here, so in fact, they had not seen it many times. Needless to say, when they came this time, it was in the daytime. When the 6 great Huashan deity cultivators gathered to discuss matters, all the disciples, servants, and servants of the Starry Hall were chased out, and all the attendants and disciples brought by the other 5 Huashan deity cultivators were also told to wait outside the hall. In the entire huge hall, only the 6 of them remained inside. Unlike most people's imaginations of the gathering of the 6 great Huashan deity cultivators, the sky changing color, and thunder and lightning, the 6 great figures who came to the Starry Hall at this moment were not dressed solemnly, and their faces were cold. They were each sitting on a high chair, like gods looking down on the world from high above. On the contrary, the 6 people in the hall were directly sitting on the ground under the starry dome, and the way they sat was also very casual. Some were half lying and half lying, some had their hands on a book, some were yawning, and some even had their eyebrows drooped as if they had fallen asleep again. The master of the starry hall, Guyu deity, was an old man with white hair and a ruddy complexion. He had gathered these great figures who were earth-shattering in the outside world, but at this moment, he did not say a word, and kept looking up at the dome of the hall, staring blankly, without any intention of speaking at all. After a long while, in the end, it was the most straightforward Jianghu deity of the heavenly law hall who could not help but glare at Guyu deity, and said in a low muffled voice, "Guyu, you have been looking at this star-moon yin-yang diagram for more than 100 years. Did you specially ask us old men to come and look at it with you today? You have all seen this diagram, right?" Guyu deity retracted his gaze, looking dazed. It did not even look like an expression that a person of his level would have. He paused, and then said, "Can you see anything strange?" He said this somewhat slowly, but his words were clearly not joking. After hearing this, the expressions of the few deities at the side changed slightly, and then they all looked up. Although most people had seen this picture a long, long time ago, they were deity transformation stage perfected monarchs. They were like gods, so they naturally had their own advantages. No matter how old the memory was, it shouldn't be difficult for them. After a while, the eye-catching bald True Lord Tianlan, who was sitting beside True Lord Jianghu, suddenly rubbed his big head and said with a smile, "This lousy map is still as ugly as before." "I can't tell." The perfected lords next to him also shook their heads. Perfected Lord Jianghu snorted coldly and said, "This magic treasure is the most precious treasure of your starry hall. Apart from you, probably no one else can see the secret hidden in it." Guyu deity was still looking up, and there was no change in his expression. After a while, he suddenly took a deep breath, and then said, "That moon is about to appear." Chapter 425. When Bai Lian jumped down from the high wall, she only heard a gust of wind sweep past. Another huge shadow had already landed behind her. Moreover, it was silent, as light as a falling leaf. She looked back and saw the black dog's terrifying eyes coldly looking at her from behind. The beautiful girl in white smiled and said to the huge demonic beast, "Not bad, you're much stronger than when I saw you in Kunlun Mountain a few years ago." Atsu stared at her for a moment, then looked away without saying a word, and began to look around the messy courtyard. It was still daytime, and in order to get Atsu to come here from the alley of horse-washing bridge, White Lotus had really put in a lot of effort. For example, there was a very spacious, ordinary-looking carriage parked far away on the long street outside. "Do you know, Atsu?" White Lotus turned around and walked towards the peach tree that was still in full bloom. At the same time, she said, "I don't like those soul formation true monarchs at all." Atsu's footsteps paused for a moment, then it walked forward again. It didn't seem to have much of a reaction, and it wasn't wrong to say that it was indifferent, even though soul formation true monarchs had an incomparably high status in the human cultivation world. In front of this dog, White Lotus seemed to be a lot more talkative than usual. It was probably because Atsu couldn't speak, so she could only talk to herself, or perhaps there were some things she kept in her heart that she never had anyone to say. Right now, speaking freely to this dog that couldn't speak was more reliable than speaking to most people. Most of the cultivators in the world can only see one soul formation true monarch in their lifetime, so they all worship and respect these people as gods. But I'm different. White Lotus waved her hand at Atsu, indicating it to follow her, then turned around and walked forward. At the same time, she continued, "I've seen more than one, and I've seen them all day long. Looking at them makes me tired. I don't like my master. The one who died. He took me in as a disciple because he valued my talent, but I've been under his tutelage for so long, but from start to finish, I've never seen him smile at me once. Not even once. Do you know how it feels to face a person who is as cold as ice all day? Martial Uncle Tianlan is good to me. He often smiles at me. He also takes me to many people and treats me gently. His kindness and magnanimity almost moved people in Kunlun to tears. White Lotus stopped, looked at Atsu, and said, "But do you know, at that time, I was the only one in the world who could see what was hidden in his eyes. That bald man's eyes were just like you, a bloodthirsty and carnivorous demon beast. No, he was 10 times colder than you. I don't know why he kept me alive." White Lotus said, "In fact, what Lu Chen said that day was very right. After I went back and thought about it, I felt that it was very reasonable. Because if it were me, I would also find a way to kill the rebellious disciple left by my former senior brother." Ah. The girl pursed her lips, looking a little annoyed and a little helpless. It was almost difficult for her to show such emotions in front of outsiders. But soon, she calmed down and looked at her feet. The dark hole was just a foot ahead. "Here we are, let's go down and have a look." White Lotus smiled, like the delicate peach blossom on her head, and said to Atsu. The flame on the torch burned brightly, illuminating the surrounding darkness. White Lotus held the torch she brought and carefully walked in the underground passage of the ruins of the ancient ruins. She came here once not long ago, and at that time, there was a man named Lu Chen with her. The surroundings did not seem to have changed at all. Everything was hidden in the darkness, and after being illuminated by the fire, its original appearance was revealed. However, there was nothing strange in the dilapidated walls, even the strange patterns that appeared on the walls later. But for some reason, White Lotus felt that this place seemed to be a little different from the last time she came here. She couldn't tell what was different, but she could clearly distinguish that the feeling in her heart was completely different from the last time she came here. The last time she was very quiet and calm, but this time, after entering this underground, she subconsciously became nervous. Under the calm smile, she vaguely felt that her heart seemed to be slowly beating faster. The surroundings were still so dark. She seemed to have sensed something. Is it fear? She was alone in this darkness, but she actually felt a kind of fear and terror. But why? The last time she came here with Lu Chen, she didn't feel this kind of feeling. And looking at Lu Chen, he seemed to be completely unaffected by this kind of emotion. People in this world, as long as they are normal, they will be afraid of the dark. White Lotus suddenly said to herself, then turned her head and said to Atsu, who had been following behind her, "Don't you think so, Atsu?" Her voice suddenly became low, and at that moment, she saw just behind her, the huge and strong black dog that seemed to be one with the darkness. It seemed to always prefer to walk in the dark, rather than stand in the light of the torch. Although its every step followed her, there was a boundary between light and darkness. But all this was not important, because at that moment, White Lotus suddenly saw Atsu's eyes. It was a pair of strange green pupils that suddenly turned up in the darkness, and there was a cold luster flashing through the eyes, as if death was hidden in them. The black figure stopped in the darkness and then stared at her. After a while, White Lotus whispered, "Your eyes are very beautiful, Atsu." Atsu stood still. White Lotus looked at it and asked again, "Does Lu Chen know?" This time, Atsu seemed to be a little hesitant. After a while, it stepped forward, walked past White Lotus, and walked towards the depths of the passage ahead. White Lotus looked at its figure, and a complicated look flashed in her eyes. After a while, she also followed. The wall of rubble that blocked the road slowly appeared in front of them under the illumination of the torches. Just like the last time White Lotus came here, it was tightly sealed, and there was no gap to peep into the inside of the ruins. White Lotus looked around, and after a moment of silence, she still held the torch and began to carefully search around, probably to see if she could find anything that she had missed. Atsu stood in the dim passage, and a pair of huge dog eyes kept staring at the wall. It slowly raised its head, looking from top to bottom, and from left to right. At this time, White Lotus, who was busy next to the passage, said from afar, "Atsu, look around and see if there is something wrong here. If you can really find it, I will treat you to a big meal." Atsu didn't even look at her. It just stared at the rubble wall that seemed to be piled up like a mountain. After a long time, it suddenly slowly walked forward and walked to one of the corners. At that moment, in the depths of its strange pupils, under the strange green light, there was suddenly a touch of black flames suddenly flashed. Atu stretched out a claw of his forelimb, and tentatively, he slowly touched the wall. It was an inconspicuous place in the rubble wall. It looked like a broken pillar, flat and round like a plate. Its paw slowly touched it, and then gently patted it. Chapter 426. The taste of this dish is too good. It does seem to be not bad. Lu Chen looked at old Ma with slight disdain and sneered, "It's not just not bad. Now I finally know why your pub business in Qingshidang village has been so bad for the past 10 years. The wine is terrible, the food is terrible, the only thing you can bring out is a bowl of boiled noodles. No one knows if I'm the only one who has eaten it in the past 10 years. Old Ma said angrily, "Nonsense. The pub business is bad, of course it's because of the small and poor village, it has nothing to do with my cooking. Even if I get the best immortal wine in this immortal city, can anyone in that village afford it?" Lu Chen curled his lips, looking disdainful, and said, "Anyway, I think this chef is a real businessman." Old Ma spat, then said, "What kind of business is this? I think this person looks like a traitor, maybe he's a sorcerer from the devil cult." Lu Chen laughed and said, "You're so unreasonable. You're slandering him as a member of the devil cult just because his cooking isn't as good?" Old Ma turned his head to look at the kitchen at the back of the pub. There was a curtain hanging there, blocking the scene inside, the layout of which was the same as most restaurants. After a while, Old Ma said, "I'm just saying it casually, it's not like I'm going to arrest him immediately. Besides, this person is one of the people on the list, so he's very suspicious." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "You can't say that. The first 2 times, the gardener and the butcher died and one escaped. We didn't find any more evidence to prove that they were sorcerers from the devil cult, so we can't be sure if the third chef is from the devil cult." Old Ma raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine. He clicked his tongue and suddenly lowered his voice to say to Lu Chen, "Why do I feel that something is wrong with this matter? I can ignore the others, but this list really doesn't feel right." Lu Chen frowned but didn't say anything. Old Ma looked at his expression and his eyes suddenly lit up. "You think so too, right? It's a little strange, and the people on the list are all in the immortal city. With Fuyunji's past abilities, it shouldn't be difficult to find them. Why would the 2 of us be assigned to investigate?" After Lu Chen finished speaking, he was silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something. After a while, he looked up at Old Ma and said, "Forget it, don't think so much. Let's go back and see the chef." "All right." Old Ma nodded and drank the wine in his cup. On Mount Celestial Dragon in Zhengxianmeng, the gathering of the 6 divine transformation stage supremes, which attracted the attention of the world, actually ended much faster than most people expected. When they entered the hall, there were 6 figures, but when they walked out, there were only 5. The only one who didn't follow them out was the master of the Star Hall, Guyu. Many people waiting in the distance saw the 5 figures in front of the hall, and there was an immediate uproar in the crowd. However, perhaps out of respect for these big shots who occupied the peak of the human cultivation world, the others didn't run forward for the time being. In front of the hall, 5 deity transformation stage perfected monarchs stood side by side with different expressions on their faces. There was almost no interaction or greeting between them, and no one else could tell what had happened in the hall from the expressions on their faces. "I heard that our immortal allies has been flourishing recently, and there are many strange people competing to join us." The first to speak was Immortal Jianghu. His usually stern and cold voice sounded like a knife, making people feel uncomfortable. "Am I right, Tianlan?" After this last sentence was asked, the originally calm front of the Star Hall suddenly became dead silent. The other 3 divine transformation stage supremes all looked at Immortal Jianghu, and after a while, they all looked at Immortal Tianlan, who was standing not far from Immortal Jianghu. Immortal Tianlan smiled very gently and politely, and even looked a little embarrassed. He used his hand to gently touch his unusually bright bald head. "Indeed, it is all thanks to the hard work of the Supremes that our Zhengxianmeng can have today's situation. Only then can we win the hearts of the world." The Supremes next to him nodded slightly, obviously not repulsed by immortal Tianlan's flattery. From this, it could also be seen that people who were high and mighty like the divine transformation stage supremes had long lost interest in all kinds of flattery. However, based on the current situation, it should be to distinguish who the flatterer was, and what was the identity of the flatterer. Immortal Jianghu smiled coldly, looked at immortal Tianlan with some arrogance, and directly walked down the stone steps. Suddenly, many people rushed out from the crowd in the distance, crowded around him, and quickly left. The expressions of the other three divine transformation stage perfected lords changed slightly, but they quickly returned to normal. None of them spoke to perfected Lord Tianlan, and after nodding politely, they had no intention of getting involved in this matter and went their separate ways. Soon, perfected Lord Tianlan was the only one left in front of the starry palace. However, his expression still looked very calm, and there was also a smile on his face, as if nothing had happened just now. However, when he occasionally looked back at the Star Hall, there seemed to be a hint of worry in the depths of his eyes. The blood moon that has not been seen for 1,000 years. He whispered to himself, and seemed to swallow the words after that. No one could hear him more clearly. White Lotus carefully searched the nearby passageways with a torch, but in the end, she found nothing, just like when Lu Chen was here that day. She seemed to be a little unhappy, and muttered, could it be that all the good things have been taken away by him? However, as she said that, she shook her head, probably thinking that it was more likely that there was actually no secret here. Otherwise, with her and Lu Chen's abilities, it was impossible that they could not find anything. However, the situation today was a little different, because apart from herself, there was also a huge black dog. White Lotus turned around and walked towards Atsu, and at the same time said, Atsu, have you looked around here, including the black runes on the wall? Is there anything? Halfway through her sentence, she suddenly stopped and frowned at the same time. This was because in her vision, the black dog did not sniff around the surrounding ground to look for secrets, nor did it lie on the two sides of the passageway to carefully look at the remnant rune patterns on the wall. From the beginning until now, Atsu only stood in one place, under the wall of rubble. Its pair of eyes stared fixedly at the stone, green light flashing, and darkness surging. After an unknown period of time, a red light suddenly reflected in White Lotus's clear eyes. A strange shadow slowly appeared on the strange round stone in front of Atsu. It looked a little round and a little blurry, but most importantly, the shadow was not black, but red with a strong aura. Blood red. It was a blood red moon. Chapter 427. What's going on with Fuyunji? There's something wrong with the name list they gave us. As they walked out of the tavern, Old Ma lowered his voice and complained to Lu Chen, what's wrong with that chef? Isn't he just an ordinary person who works honestly? He doesn't have any cultivation or magic power, how could he be related to the evil sect? Lu Chen also looked a little puzzled, frowning slightly. After a while he said, that name list was given to me by that damn Baldy himself, Fuyunji wouldn't dare to deceive him. Maybe we've made a mistake. What secret did that chef have that we didn't notice? Old Ma snorted and said, what secret place is it? Tell me. Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, didn't I say that I might not have noticed? But that shouldn't be the case. It's one thing to deceive me, but you've been in this line of work for decades. You have a wealth of experience and unique insight. There's no way I can fool you. Old Ma's expression changed, he almost laughed out loud, then he coughed dryly, nodded and said seriously, what you said is very reasonable. Lu Chen sent a flying kick at him. Old Ma smiled and moved out of the way. Then, he walked up to Lu Chen and said, the Floating Clouds office must have found something suspicious about the people on this list, but they haven't confirmed it yet. That's why they sent it to us through the True Sovereign. I think they wouldn't deliberately deceive True Monarch, but what exactly did they find? They didn't tell us at all, causing us to have to start from the beginning. This is not right. Lu Chen pondered for a moment, suddenly looked at Old Ma, said, did you offend that Shuang Hall leader recently? Old Ma's face stiffened, said, don't talk nonsense, with my identity, how would I dare to offend that person? Lu Chen said, I think maybe that person is purposely giving us a difficult problem, to test us. Old Ma rolled his eyes, said, I'm just a small fry, how could Shuang like me? I think this thing is aimed at you. Lu Chen snorted, said, why is it aimed at me? Old Ma laughed, don't play dumb, she's a hall leader of Fuyunji, even in Zhengxiameng she can do whatever she wants except for those true monarchs, what is there to be afraid of? Lu Chen looked at Old Ma smiled faintly. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly sighed, and said, let's go back. With that, he walked forward. Old Ma followed, and asked him hesitantly, then what about the chef today? Lu Chen thought for a while, and said, come early tomorrow, secretly follow him and observe for a while, see if there's anything strange, if there's still nothing, then replace him. Old Ma nodded, then said as if thinking, actually, I have a feeling that this chef might really be Fuyunji's people being suspicious. Look at the chef's skills today, and his knife skills when he was in the kitchen, cutting meat and vegetables so skillfully, it's obvious that he's been working as a chef all his life, there's no problem. Lu Chen laughed coldly, said, what you said, it's all your own imagination. If you really want to put it this way, if you say his knife skills are good, I'll say it's knife skills. Cutting meat fast? Maybe it's because he cut too much human meat. Hey! Old Ma said angrily, I just came out from that pub, don't talk nonsense, I was so scared that I almost vomited. Lu Chen laughed, and reached out to pat Old Ma's shoulder, then suddenly said with some emotion, but, today is also a little unexpected. What? I didn't see that Song Wenji, if she also has that list, shouldn't she also come? Strange. On Mount Tianlong, in the Hall of Heavenly Law, this time, it was not in the solemn main hall of the Hall of Heavenly Law, but in another secluded room. However, the people were still the same, it was still Immortal Tiehu and his adopted daughter Song Wenji. Perhaps because this was a more private place, Taihu Supreme was much more relaxed. He was wearing a soft and comfortable nightgown and was half lying on a large reclining chair. One of his hands was placed flat on his side, while the other was holding a crystal-clear jade cup. Inside the cup was an unknown but strangely blood-red wine. From time to time, he would bring it to his mouth and take a sip, after which his face would reveal a satisfied expression. This seemed to be a comfortable life of an immortal, especially the charming Song Wenji who was kneeling on the ground beside his thighs, with a smile on her face, her cheeks slightly red. She looked really beautiful, like a peach, and stretched out her hands to gently massage his thighs. After a while, Song Wenji smiled and said, Father, do you feel better? True monarch Tai who opened his eyes and said with a doting smile, much better, much better. Thanks to you, my old bones can finally enjoy a good time. Song Wenji burst out laughing, and said, look at you, you are one of the 6 great immortals of Zhengxiameng. You can call the wind and summon the rain in the cultivation world of the entire divine land, but now you make it sound so pitiful. Immortal Tiehu sighed, stretched out his hand and gently patted Song Wenji's hand, then sat up and motioned for her to sit beside him. Song Wenji stood up and dragged a round stool from the side, and sat beside Immortal Tiehu, then obediently placed his free hand on her thighs, and gently massaged him, looking really filial. Immortal Tiehu's eyes were full of love, and he looked very satisfied. He even stretched out one of his hands and grabbed Song Wenji's plump thighs, then sighed and said, it's all an undeserved reputation. Look at how high and mighty I have been all these years. Almost everyone in the world looks at me the same way. And here at Heavenly Law Hall, for many years I could only maintain a righteous aura, and be solemn and self-restrained. Even the slightest mistake would cause all kinds of gossip. In fact, I have been cultivating all my life, and when I was young, I wholeheartedly worked for the world's righteousness, and for the dignity of Heavenly Law Hall, I worked myself to death. Now that I think about it, it's really a great injustice. Song Wenji's hands slightly paused, and her head slightly drooped down, making it difficult for others to see her expression, but then she softly said, how can that be? Everyone in the world, including Zhengxiameng, respects you very much. Immortal Tiehu snorted, with a disdainful look in his eyes. His withered palm gently stroked Song Wenji's thighs, and at the same time said, I have finally seen through them, those people only want me to be a saint, but they are sanctimonious and seek pleasure every day, damn it. As he spoke, he glanced at Song Wenji, with a smile on his face, and said, "Fortunately, my luck is not bad, and I can still meet you in my old age. I have no regrets in my old age." Song Wenji glanced at him with a faint smile, and said, "Foster father, if you talk nonsense again, I will be angry." Immortal Jianghu laughed, and waved his hand, saying, all right, I know you are thin-skinned, then I won't say any more." Song Wenji smiled, and then seemed to think of something, and said, "Foster father, there is something I want to ask you. Why don't you let me continue to look for the people on the list?" Immortal Jianghu said lightly, "Give Tianlan some face, not long ago I made him lose face. In this matter, if you follow too closely, it will be too much of a loss if someone in Fuyunji secretly plots against you." Song Wenji was startled, and said, "With Immortal Tianlan's identity, he won't make things difficult for a little girl like me, right?" Immortal Jianghu took a sip of the strange blood-red wine in the cup, slightly narrowed his eyes, and said, "Generally speaking, people like immortals will naturally be proud of their identity, but this person, Tianlan." He was silent for a moment, and then continued, "In the past 10 years, the world has been peaceful. In the whole Zhengxianmeng, only his Fuyunji has always been fighting with the devil cult, both openly and secretly, so there have been countless casualties. This person is also the most murderous immortal of Huashan realm and the immortal allies for hundreds of years." His white eyebrows slightly wrinkled, and said, "It is not that I am afraid of him, but it is better to be cautious with this person." Chapter 428. Lu Chen sat in the yard and looked at the black dog lying by his feet. He frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. Old Ma, who was next to him, felt strange and asked, "What's wrong? Is there anything strange about this dog?" Lu Chen hesitated and seemed to be unsure. He said, "Not really. I just feel that it is a little listless today." Old Ma was stunned and said, "I remember that Atsu is like this at this time. Anyway, it is either eating or sleeping. Is it because it wants to sleep because it is getting dark?" Lu Chen pondered for a moment, seemingly disapproving. Just as he was about to speak, the two of them suddenly heard a series of knocks coming from the gate in the distance. Clap, clap. The sound of clapping was particularly clear in the quiet surroundings. Old Ma and Lu Chen looked at each other and saw the doubt in each other's eyes, as well as a trace of vigilance that seemed to come from instinct. After a moment, Old Ma said in a low voice, "Only Fuyunji knows about this place. Did they send someone here, or did you come here yourself?" Lu Chen simply shook his head and said, "It can't be that damn Baldy. Trust me, if he came here, he would either appear soundlessly in this courtyard, or the four walls of this place would have been crushed before he could come here." Old Ma didn't seem to have any objections to Lu Chen's judgment. At the same time, he muttered, "That makes sense. Moreover, it shouldn't be someone from the Floating Clouds agency. I just went to look for them not too long ago." He paused for a moment before standing up and saying, "Forget it, I'll go take a look." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Be careful." Old Ma smiled and said, "Don't worry." Then he turned around and walked towards the gate. Lu Chen lowered his head and touched Atsu's head. Atsu looked up at him and his eyes flickered. Lu Chen said in a low voice, "What's the matter?" Atsu turned its head and seemed to have some reaction. Suddenly, a confused voice came from the gate. After a while, the sound of footsteps was heard. It was Old Ma who came back with a strange look on his face. There was a figure behind him. Delicate face and elegant temperament. It was White Lotus. Lu Chen furrowed his brows as he stood up. The usually lazy Atu also stood up without a word and stared at Bai Lian with a strange look in his eyes. "Why are you here?" Lu Chen asked. White Lotus was not angry at Lu Chen's cold question. It seemed that she had completely forgotten about the conflict with Lu Chen in the butcher's shop a few days ago. At this moment, White Lotus was all smiles. She did not look like a mortal. She nodded to Lu Chen and said, "We meet again." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma with a trace of doubt in his eyes. Old Ma smiled bitterly and walked to his side. She said that she will come to help us track down the evil cult. This time she came with the approval of true Lord Tianlan. There is also a handwritten letter as proof. Even Lu Chen, who was usually calm, was stunned at this moment. He asked in astonishment, "What?" Old Ma sighed, took out a letter from his bosom and handed it to Lu Chen. He said, "Although I don't know how she got this letter is indeed written by true Lord Tianlan. I can recognize it. It can't be wrong." Lu Chen's face was gloomy. He took out the letter and read it from beginning to end. Then he snorted and said in a low voice, "What the hell is this damn baldy doing? He has to make trouble for us." Old Ma coughed and said, "Be careful with your words. She is still here." At this time, White Lotus smiled and said, "Are you two men done talking? Why are you whispering like a little girl?" Lu Chen and Old Ma turned to look at her together. After a while, Lu Chen frowned and said, "This has nothing to do with you, and it may be dangerous. You really don't have to get involved." Bai Lian's face turned solemn as she said, "Now that I've been cultivating with martial uncle Tianlan, I've received his teachings and understand that cultivation is for the sake of righteousness and for the sake of the common people. That's why I've come to ask martial uncle Tianlan to lend you a hand." Lu Chen and Old Ma were both stunned and then looked at each other. After a while, Lu Chen sighed and said, "Well, now I believe that you have been cultivating with that damn baldy. What's the matter with that damn baldy? How could he throw this little ancestor here?" In the bedroom, Lu Chen complained to Old Ma. Old Ma was also puzzled and pondered, could it be that Senior Zhenjuan has some kind of far-reaching plan? Is he playing a big game of chess? Bullshit. Lu Chen interrupted him rudely and sneered, "The most annoying people are those who have not done anything but say that they are playing a big game of chess to save face. Tell me, what's the benefit of letting White Lotus stay with us?" Obviously, Old Ma could not figure out the reason, so he had to smooth things over and said, Forget it. It's not that urgent. Calm down. After tomorrow morning, I will go to Mount Tianlong and find an opportunity to see a mortal and see what is going on." Lu Chen shook his head and said to himself, "I don't think it's useful. That damn baldy will hide his thoughts in his heart and won't tell you." Old Ma laughed and said, "It doesn't matter. It's just a trip. Well, it's getting late. You should rest early." As he said this, he walked to the door and opened it. Suddenly, he heard a cry of surprise. His body stiffened and then he jumped back reflexively. Lu Chen and Black Dog were also startled. They stood up and turned their heads to look. They saw a figure standing at the door. In the dark night, that white face looked a little scary, although it was still very beautiful. It was White Lotus. Old Ma seemed to be quite frightened. He patted his chest and said in surprise, "Little lady. What are you doing standing here in the middle of the night?" White Lotus smiled and said, "I'm here to bring you something." "Huh?" The two people in the room were both surprised. Old Ma said in surprise, "Something for me? What is it?" White Lotus reached out and pulled a big package from the side. Without saying a word, she pushed it into Old Ma's arms. Old Ma hesitated for a moment and opened it. Suddenly, his face changed. He jumped up and shouted, Isn't this my bedding and luggage?" "Yes." White Lotus smiled and said, "I packed it for you and brought it here for you. Not bad, right? You don't have to thank me." "Thank you." Old Ma was angry and shouted, "What do you mean?" "It's all what I mean is, that bedroom belongs to me. You can't be delusional enough to cohabit with a girl like me, right? You." Old Ma was so angry that he was speechless. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. When he turned around, he saw that Lu Chen was smiling gloatingly at his misfortune. He immediately became even angrier. Turning around, he yelled at Bai Lian, "There are 2 rooms here. Why did you only take mine and not Lu Chen's?" White Lotus glanced at Lu Chen and then said, "Martial Uncle Tianlan asked me to pick up this person. In addition, he often said 'damn baldy' from time to time, but he is still alive and well today. It shows that he must have a backer. Why would I provoke him? Old Ma was so angry that he shouted, "So you think I'm a small fry, so you provoke me?" White Lotus glanced at him and then nodded and said, "Yes, if I provoke you, what will you do?" After saying that, she turned and left. There was silence in the bedroom, and the atmosphere suddenly became awkward. Lu Chen and Old Ma looked at each other. After a while, Old Ma suddenly laughed and said, "It seems that I really can't do anything." Chapter 429. Early in the morning, White Lotus woke up early. The night had just passed and the day had just begun to dawn. It was a quiet and cold time. She lay on the warm bed for a while, then put on her clothes, opened the door and walked out. The courtyard was quiet, the tender green grass still had dewdrops, a few breezes quietly passed by, passing through the treetops, gently swaying the branches. A person was standing in the middle of the courtyard, hands behind his back, looking up at the sky. Perhaps hearing the sound, he turned around to look. It was Lu Chen. Their eyes met, stared at each other for a moment. Lu Chen nodded, said, "Morning." "Morning." White Lotus pulled the cloak on her shoulders a little tighter, seemed to feel a little cold, walked over, said, "Do you usually wake up this early?" Lu Chen said, "No, it's only today." White Lotus was a little puzzled, said, "Why?" Lu Chen said, "Because I didn't know before. Old Ma's snores were so loud, I didn't sleep well the whole night." White Lotus burst out laughing, as if it was the most innocent and beautiful smile of her age. She gently covered her mouth with her hand, said with a smile, "Did he sleep in your room last night?" "Yes," Lu Chen nodded, said, "Originally I didn't want to, in the end he didn't want to leave, so I had to let him sleep on the floor." White Lotus smiled, looked him up and down, suddenly said, "I haven't seen you for a few years. I always feel that you seem to have changed a lot compared to the time in Kunlun Mountain." Lu Chen asked, "What about you, now in front of other people outside, do you still pretend like that?" White Lotus smiled, "I didn't pretend, I have always been like that." Lu Chen gave her a deep look and said, "Back then, when you tried to kill me, you were fierce and cruel. You weren't like this today." White Lotus didn't mind and said, "At that time, I was only protecting myself. Otherwise, if there was a slight mistake, would have been another one of your people who died silently." The two of them looked at each other for a while before looking away. There were many different kinds of people in this world. Some lived easier lives, some carried more burdens on their backs, and some had a part of their bodies that seemed to be naturally immersed in darkness, carrying secrets that no one knew about, just like shadows. Whether it was Lu Chen or White Lotus, neither of them had any intention of asking each other about those secrets. It was as if those things had never existed in the first place. Lu Chen just said to White Lotus in a very calm tone, "I can't figure out why you suddenly came to interfere in this matter. It should have nothing to do with you, and I'm not very willing to do things with you." White Lotus nodded, not angry, but also had no intention of retreating. After thinking for a while, she said, "I came here because I have a little interest in the devil cult. It has nothing to do with you." Now the devil cult is declining, and the immortal allies are dominating, especially in the immortal city where the headquarters of Zhengxiameng is located. It is almost impossible to find the trace of the devil cult. Now the only place I can think of is here. Saying this, without waiting for Lu Chen to speak, White Lotus immediately said, "Don't worry, I won't hinder you from doing things, and if there is anything I can help with, I will also help. Besides, Martial Uncle Tianlan has promised me, no matter how big your reputation is, can you still run to ask him to take back his order?" Lu Chen secretly scolded the damn baldy again in his heart, but there was no change on his face. Perhaps it was because she saw his unhappy expression. White Lotus suddenly smiled and said, "How about this? To show my sincerity, I can tell you another secret that I haven't made public yet." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and turned to look at her. White Lotus smiled and said, "Not long ago, everything in Kunlun Mountain should have been settled, so from now on, my martial uncle Tianlan should officially select a large number of elites from the Kunlun party to come to the Immortal City together." Lu Chen's face changed slightly, but he did not say anything. White Lotus smiled again and said, "Maybe there are people you knew before among the people coming." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, and said, "Who?" White Lotus said, "I heard that there are several Yuanying Zenrens coming, and the most outstanding masters of the younger generation under the Yuanying realm will probably be transferred here." Lu Chen glanced at her, and finally asked, "What about Su Qingjun?" White Lotus smiled and said, "She will also come." For more than 10 years, the world has been peaceful, and most people in Zhengxiameng are also happy to be idle. In addition to perfected Lord Tianlan, the other 5 perfected gods of Huashan realm in Zhengxiameng, and the forces under their command, almost do not take action against the outside world. Occasionally, when something happens, they usually just report the name of Zhengxiameng, plus the name of their perfected lord, and naturally, everything goes smoothly. Old Ma leaned on the edge of the bed and said to Lu Chen, who was sitting next to him, "So for a long time, the immortal allies have not transferred a large number of forces from the sects like this." Lu Chen said lightly, "Except Fuyunji." Old Ma smiled and said, "Yes, except Fuyunji." Over the years, Fuyunji is the only hall in Zhengxiameng that has always been fighting against the outside world, and it has always had a bad reputation in the immortal allies. Old Ma said, "In addition to the many shadows that have been criticized for spending a lot of money for no reason, over the years, Fuyunji's strength has always been strong, and it has become the most powerful hall in Zhengxiameng, which is also feared by others." Lu Chen's eyes flickered and said, "But even so, now the damn Baldi still disregards the criticism, and forcibly mobilized the elites of Kunlun Party, one of the 5 sects in the world, into the immortal city. If these people enter Fuyunji," Old Ma shook his head and said, "In fact, it doesn't matter whether they enter or not. Everyone knows that both Kunlun Party and Fuyunji now only listen to the orders of perfected lord. In short, in this way, at least for now, in the immortal city, the strength of our side will soar to the sky, and we will be invincible." There was no joy on Lu Chen's face. Instead, he frowned. After a moment of silence, he said, "We all understand these things, and the damn Baldi can't have not thought of it. What does he want to do, that he would actually risk offending all the other perfected lords of the divine transformation realm to do this?" Old Ma said with a bitter smile, "He thinks deeply, there must be something that we can't think of." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Are you still going to see him today?" Old Ma said, "No, since we already know that perfected lord agreed to let White Lotus come here, he must have his own ideas, so we don't have to be nosy. As for you here, I don't think it's a big deal, it's just one more person." Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "Okay, for now, that's the only way." After that, the two chatted for a while, and then walked out together. They saw that White Lotus had already packed up and was waiting in the courtyard. Seeing them come out, both sides greeted each other, and just as they were about to go out, White Lotus suddenly stopped, looked behind her, and said to Lu Chen, "We keep Atsa here every day, it's quite pitiful. How about we bring it out today?" Chapter 430. That day, when Lu Chen, Old Ma, and White Lotus walked out of the horse-washing bridge alley, the black dog did not follow them. The reason was actually very simple. It could even be said to be the same old story. The immortal city had issued a ban on dogs. It would be too eye-catching to have such a big dog following them. As for White Lotus's suggestion to find a spacious carriage, Lu Chen and Old Ma rejected it. This was because the place they were going to this time was no longer a secluded alley or a deserted house, but a lively street. Of course, in addition to this, Atsu itself was also a reason. After hearing White Lotus's suggestion to take it out for a stroll, Atsu did not seem to be interested at all. As usual, it held the demon beast meat that Lu Chen threw to it and gnawed on it with relish. It seemed to be very satisfied with its current life and had no intention of changing. So in the end, White Lotus had to give up on this idea. However, when she followed Lu Chen and Old Ma to the lively street and saw the tavern where the suspected chef was, Lu Chen and Old Ma looked at each other but did not walk in. Instead, they entered a tea house across the street and found a seat by the window. They ordered some tea and snacks and actually drank tea and chatted leisurely, glancing at the tavern from time to time. White Lotus had always been a very smart girl, but she wasn't born with knowledge. She didn't understand what Lu Chen and Old Ma were doing, so she sat in the tea house for 2 hours and saw that the two men still had no intention of leaving. Finally, she couldn't help but ask the question in her mind. White Lotus had been drinking tea for 2 hours in the tea house, but the two men still had no intention of leaving. "What are you two doing?" Old Ma pointed at the tavern opposite and said, "We went there yesterday, so we have to avoid arousing suspicion today, so we waited here." "Wait for what?" White Lotus asked in confusion. Old Ma said, "Let's wait for the chef to make a mistake. Let's see if he has any abnormal behavior or actions. If he has, we will naturally follow the clues and investigate. If not," he paused and glanced at Lu Chen. White Lotus quickly noticed Old Ma's action. She also looked at Lu Chen and asked, "What if nothing happens?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then said, "Continue to wait." White Lotus frowned and said, "How long do we have to wait? If there is no problem with that person, you can't possibly wait for a lifetime, right?" Old Ma coughed and interrupted, "That won't happen. Generally speaking, we will guard this kind of thing for half a month at most. If nothing else happens after half a month, we will usually give up on this person." White Lotus's eyes lit up slightly and said, "That means, you usually only need half a month at most to investigate these people." Lu Chen, who was next to her, shook his head and said, "No." "Huh?" Lu Chen didn't say anything more. Old Ma continued, "Generally, when people do this kind of disguise, they will often reveal all kinds of flaws within 10 days to half a month. This is inevitable. That is why we said that at most half a month, we can see if there is anything strange about this person. However, there are exceptions to everything. In the shadow business, there are also some top figures. They have strong nerves and are very good at hiding. They do everything the way they do. You can't find anything strange about them at all." As he said this, Old Ma glanced at Lu Chen intentionally or unintentionally, but he saw that Lu Chen's face was indifferent and didn't change at all. So, Old Ma smiled and said to White Lotus, "In short, since we can't find the flaws of that person now, we will wait for a period of time to secretly monitor him. If there is really something strange, Lu Chen will naturally see it." White Lotus's eyes flickered and she looked at Lu Chen meaningfully. Then she said, "Sure enough, there is something wrong with your identity. When we were on Kunlun Mountain, I felt that there was something wrong with you." Lu Chen smiled and said, "It's all your martial uncle's fault." The waiting time was obviously very unbearable, at least for White Lotus, who was experiencing this kind of thing for the first time. After enduring for half a day with great difficulty, she finally couldn't help but say to the two men beside her, "For such a person who may not necessarily be a spy of the evil sect, is it not worth it to waste so much time here? This kind of thing can never be rushed. Patience is more important than anything." Lu Chen replied, "And although this person is on the list, he is definitely not a big shot." White Lotus was stunned for a moment and said, "How can you be so sure?" Lu Chen smiled and didn't speak. Old Ma at the side said, "Location." He pointed to the tavern and said, "Such an ordinary tavern, being an inconspicuous cook, he can't get any secret information about Zhengxianmeng and also can't be of great help to the evil sect. A spy with real identity and ability can't possibly have this kind of identity." White Lotus pondered for a moment and then nodded and said, "So there are quite a lot of tricks here. But since that's the case, why do we still? Small characters also have their uses. In the situation where we can't find the evil sect, we can follow these small characters and maybe we can slowly follow the vines to find some bigger people." As Lu Chen spoke, he stood up and said calmly, "Let's go, looks like that cook is going home early today." The leader of the younger generation of the Kunlun party, one of the most talented and strongest Kunlun disciples, Su Qingjun, walked into this vast and majestic immortal city without city walls at dusk. When she entered the city, she was alone, but this time there were many people from the Kunlun party who came with her to the immortal city, and they were extremely powerful. Under the leadership of several powerful Yuanine realm Jinren, the most outstanding elites of the Kunlun party almost all came from Kunlun Mountain to the Immortal City. But in order not to attract attention, they separated halfway. This was also the first time Su Qingjun came to the Immortal City. Perhaps it was a coincidence, from the direction she came from, when Su Qingjun walked into the Immortal City and walked on the bustling streets, she looked into the distance and saw the majestic and huge statue. It felt exactly the same as Luchen that day. That huge statue of the white tiger divine beast, although it had weathered wind and rain and was old and mottled, but that pair of eyes seemed to have life in the silence. No matter where Su Qingjun went, she always felt that there was a pair of eyes staring at her. That white tiger divine beast. That inexplicable aura. This was the first time Su Qingjun came to the Immortal City. Like Lu Chen, she was shocked by this city. Then, she strolled on the long street and soon found that although night was about to fall and the sky was dark, the bustling scene on the streets of the Immortal City did not show any signs of subsiding. It seemed that here, even in the dark, they could still have a party. She suddenly thought of her hometown. She thought of her mother who had not spoken to her for several years. She thought of her father who had become taciturn after that incident. She also thought of the man she had not seen for a long time. She felt a little tired. She looked up and looked around. On the streets of this foreign land, she suddenly wanted to find a tavern to have a good drink and rest. Chapter 431. The sky was dark. Many of the shops on both sides of the street were still brightly lit. Obviously, they had no intention of closing down. On the contrary, the streets without street lamps seemed a little dim, which also made the candlelight in the taverns feel warmer. People walked on the streets as if it were daytime. But looking from the tea house, those shadowy, half-dark figures suddenly made Lu Chen feel a little strange. This bustling city, under the bright lights of the night, for some reason, was like a beautiful dream. Under the bright shadows, there were countless figures like ghosts, walking back and forth, walking back and forth. Who knew where they came from and where they were going? Who knew what kind of ups and downs, twists and turns, and how wonderful their lives were? Everyone was walking in darkness and light all the time. At this moment, Lu Chen raised his head and drank the cup in his hand. Only then did he realize that it was tea, not wine. Suddenly, he inexplicably wanted to drink. The bored White Lotus had long lost her patience. After enduring for a long time, she finally decided to complain to the two men in front of her. "It's getting late. Why don't we go back first?" she said to the two men who seemed to be very patient. As she said that, she seemed to think of something at the same time. She frowned and said, "Are you waiting for this tavern to close and that chef to go home? Are you going to follow him?" Old Ma said, "That's not it. That chef lives directly in the tavern. So if we really want to keep an eye on him, we actually have to send people to keep watch here at night according to the rules." Bai Lian clearly hadn't thought that this would be the answer she'd been waiting for. A bitter look appeared on her beautiful face, but fortunately, Lu Chen spoke up at this moment, "That won't be necessary. We only have so many people, we can't waste our time like this every day. Let's call it a day." White Lotus breathed a sigh of relief. Old Ma looked at Lu Chen and did not say anything. At this moment, the three of them stood up and paid the bill. Then, they walked out of the tea house and prepared to go home. However, when he reached the end of the long street, Lu Chen stopped and said to the two of them, "You guys go back first. I'm going to walk around for a while and buy some wine later." Old Ma and White Lotus were both a little surprised. Old Ma was close to him and jokingly scolded, "Hey, you seem to be drinking more and more recently. Don't become a drunkard." Lu Chen smiled and said, "It's just a pastime." After saying that, he waved at them and turned to walk to the other end of the street. Old Ma and White Lotus looked at each other and then left. Looking at it from the tea house was different from walking on the dark streets with one's own body. The people coming and going on the streets were like all kinds of people in the world. The moment they passed by each other, they felt all kinds of strange life. It was just that the silhouette continued to flicker, like a ghost. The only difference was that he was about to become one of them. Lu Chen walked on this ghostly street in silence. Unfamiliar faces filled his eyes and there was not the slightest bit of warmth around him. Then, he stopped at the door of the tea house. The dim yellow light shone through the door window and sprinkled on his body. There was laughter and people talking in the tea house. It was bustling like the human world. He stood for a while and then pushed the door open and walked in. Su Qingjun walked over from the other end of the long street. This place was very different from her hometown, Kunwa City. It was far more prosperous than her hometown. Even after dark, it was still so lively. This was something that had never happened in Kunwa City before. Su Qingjun walked in the crowd. Looking at the bright lights on both sides of the street, she felt a little familiar. She was like a bird that finally escaped from a cage. In this huge and free immortal city, she relaxed the blockage in her heart and could breathe freely. In this kind of situation, she no longer had to face that dull and silent home. She no longer had to face her parents who were deeply hostile but cold. Every time she went back, there was a heavy sense of guilt that had been torturing her all these years. At this time, she really wanted to drink. She rarely drank before. She still remembered that the man named Lu Chen once told her about the benefits of drinking. In the open space by the cliff, he told her how good wine tasted. It could help her forget her worries, relieve her worries, indulge her emotions, and sleep peacefully. In that home, on that mountain, in that sect, she never had the chance to try it. Until today, it seemed that she really had a feeling of freedom for the first time. Su Qingjun stopped and saw the brightly lit tea house on the side of the street in front of her. In front of her, warm lights shone through the door window. There were sounds of laughter and people flashing. She thought for a while and then walked over. You guys are here. In a quiet hall on Mount Celestial Dragon, perfected Lord Tianlan, who had a huge body and a shiny skull, smiled and said to the people in front of him. There were several big chairs in front of him, on which sat 4 people. All of them were powerful Yuanian perfected masters from the Kunlun party. Moreover, they could be considered his trusted subordinates. Among the 5 perfected masters, Perfected Pearl was the leader. The others were Su Qingjun's master Masato Kihara, perfected master Dongfang Tao, and perfected master Guanyang. Perfected Pearl answered with a smile, Senior brother Qiandang asked me to bring you a message. After receiving your letter, he wanted to come to the immortal city in person. Unfortunately, there are too many trivial matters in the sect. Senior brother is now a sect master and really can't leave, so he asked me to apologize to you. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. That's to be expected. Don't mind it. In fact, I'm very relieved as long as you guys can come. By the way, where are the other young disciples? Next to him, Jinren Kihara said, reporting to Martial Uncle, in order to avoid any trouble, the disciples who came here this time are scattered, but according to the time, they should be arriving in a few days. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. Good, it's good that you're here. I can only do things freely after you guys come. The 4 Yuanian perfected masters looked at each other and said, just tell us what you need, Uncle Master. Lu Chen bought 2 jugs of wine from the counter of the tavern. He casually glanced at the kitchen and saw that it was the same as usual. A few cooks were chatting and laughing as they prepared the food. The innkeeper was busy doing the accounts. The inside and outside of the house seemed to be the most ordinary scene in the world. He saw the cook, but he couldn't see anything suspicious about him. Maybe he was wrong this time. He lowered his head and accepted the 2 jugs of wine from the smiling innkeeper. He paid the bill and walked out. The night was long, and the wine was enough to kill a lonely night. When he passed by the other customers in the tavern, he could see that their faces were red from the alcohol. Even their voices had become louder. But here, in the bright light of the lamps, they looked more alive, more human than the shadows in the street outside. The lively and cheerful atmosphere was around him, but it seemed to be far away from him. He couldn't touch it, and he couldn't blend in. Lu Chen carried the wine, pushed open the door of the tavern, and walked out. Darkness floated outside the tavern and sprinkled down, quickly surrounding him. He left the tavern. As he was leaving, someone walked in from the door. They brushed past each other when the light and shadow intertwined. Chapter 432. The door opened, light spilled out from the tavern, intersecting with the darkness of the street. The voices and laughter rose and fell like the tide, the figures coming and going were like ghosts, carrying their own thoughts and forgetting to take another look, brushing past each other. Faintly, there seemed to be a wisp of fragrance, faint and dark, like the twists and turns of life. He carried the wine jug, looking ahead, into the deep night, walking alone, not looking at the person beside him. That slender figure, when she pushed open the door and entered, the door swayed, the light and shadow intertwined. After a moment of time, her figure stopped at the door. Imprinted in her eyes was the lively scene of the bright lights in the room. She was deep in thought, the light shone on her face, reflecting a dazzling luster, like she was immersed in the memories of the past. She frowned slightly, as if thinking about something. After a moment, she suddenly turned and pushed open the door again. The long street was long, the tide of people surged in the darkness, like there were ghosts walking in the night. She looked up, searching for the figure that brushed past her that made her heart jump. That figure was somewhat strange, but also seemed exceptionally familiar. Lu Chen carried the wine jug and walked on the dark street, his arms swaying slightly, the wine jug in his hand also swaying, the fine wine in the jug occasionally emitting a soft sound. He walked past a few streets, and when he saw the Shima Bridge in the distance, he suddenly stopped. He looked up at the night sky, the clouds were dense, there was no starlight, causing the earth to be dark in the night. Only a unique city like the Immortal City could still shine like a jewel in such a night. He picked up a jug of wine and drank a mouthful, the fine wine rolled down his throat, there was a burning pleasure. The night wind slowly blew, he stood where he was in thought for a moment, then suddenly turned and walked in another direction. Behind him, the darkness swayed, occasionally a figure walked by, as if there was a pair of eyes staring at his back, and after a while, a dark figure walked out from the dark street, standing at the place where Lu Chen had just stood. In the darkness, the person's face could not be seen clearly, only that she turned to look in the direction Lu Chen left, and inadvertently looked back at the Shima Bridge not far away. On this night, Lu Chen was a bit like a wandering ghost, walking alone in this brightly lit city, walking on the darkest street, all the way to the butcher's shop he had come to a few days ago. The butcher called Rui Xiaotian had long escaped, and he did not know where he went. He still remembered that there was a blooming peach tree in that house, and of course, there was a dark and mysterious but actually empty secret passage under the tree. He went around to the back of the house that had become a haunted house and jumped over the wall. When he landed, there was no sound. In the darkness of the night, the house was as cold as ever. The ground was still messy. After not seeing it for a few days, it seemed that there was an even more desolate and decadent atmosphere in the surroundings. Only the peach tree in the courtyard, even in this late night, was still in full bloom, showing vitality, and a faint fragrance floated in the night wind. Lu Chen glanced around, then went straight to the peach tree. The entrance to the secret passage under the tree was still open, dark, like a big mouth of a demon. A dark figure flew out of the night, swept over the high wall, and stared at the courtyard below for a moment, only to see only silence. The courtyard was quiet, the peach blossoms were in full bloom, and there was no one else in sight. The figure paused for a moment, then fell from the wall, like a falling leaf, quietly, blending in with the darkness, only a pair of clear and bright eyes shining like gems in the darkness. In the untended courtyard, the grass and wildflowers seemed to grow uncontrollably, some places even almost reaching the ankles, and the air was filled with a much stronger smell of grass than usual. A wind swept through the darkness, and the grass slightly rose and fell, making rustling sounds. She frowned slightly, subconsciously feeling that something was strange, so she looked around even more vigilantly, and finally her eyes fell on the most conspicuous and most beautiful peach tree in the courtyard. The peach blossoms on the tree were like snow falling in the darkness, sparkling. She slowly walked over, the surroundings were still quiet, not a single person, not the slightest movement. There was flat ground under the tree, and a little further, it was the entrance to the dark secret passage that suddenly appeared on the ground. The person who came later stopped, looking at the secret passage, as if hesitating whether to go in or not. Another gust of night wind blew over. The peach tree trembled, and the peach blossoms on the tree swayed. It was as beautiful as a grand snowfall. She couldn't help but look up. A falling petal was reflected in her crystal-clear eyes, shining brightly. Then, the sound of the winds suddenly became violent, and a black shadow suddenly pounced out, like a roaring magical beast, sweeping away all the beauty in an instant, shattering the petal. A bunch of black flames coldly and mercilessly spewed out from the darkness, chopping down towards her head. She gave a light shout and took a step back. She didn't see how she moved, but a bright and dazzling light appeared out of nowhere in her hand. It was a cloudy night with no stars or moon, but the moment she pulled out her sword, it was as if a bright moon had suddenly risen and shone into the desolate and dilapidated courtyard. The moonlight was like water, the sword essence like the cool autumn. A sword cut through the darkness, as if it instantly illuminated the surrounding darkness, broke through the cold wind, and directly faced the black fire, bringing with it an unstoppable brilliance. The sword light illuminated the man's face, somewhat cold, somewhat weathered, and also a bit of sudden surprise. The black fire in the sword light flickered. Although it was messy, it was not extinguished. The black dagger accurately found its target in the dazzling sword shadows and hit the tip of the long sword that was as bright as autumn water. Clang, a clear and melodious sound echoed in the courtyard. Two figures intertwined, and the fierce and violent power roared like a ferocious beast. It was like a wild horse that had broken free of its reins and was about to devour someone, thirsting for the taste of blood. Their faces were reflected in the light of the sword. The blades crossed, one stabbing at the chest, the other at the throat. The wind howled mournfully, but then suddenly stopped. The light suddenly brightened, and then became silent. The darkness returned. The peach tree was still swaying, countless petals falling, like the last cold snow. Then, the two figures stopped. In the darkness, there was the sound of quiet breathing, the sound of a gentle heartbeat in the chest, a familiar gaze, a familiar face, and a strange and cold sword against the chest and throat. Lu Chen looked at Su Qingjun, who stood quietly in front of him, who seemed to grow more beautiful in the darkness. He sighed softly and said, "So it is you." As soon as he finished speaking, he looked down and felt a coldness in front of his chest. That cold sword had pierced through his clothes and into his chest. Chapter 433. The icy edge of the sword had a bone-chilling coldness that seemed to envelop his entire heart, causing Lu Chen's body to suddenly freeze. In the darkness, the two of them stood facing each other. The sharp and bright sword seemed to be the bridge between them. The ancient sword in her hand seemed to have weathered countless years of wind and rain, but it was still shining brightly at this moment. It reflected Su Qingjun's cold and beautiful face. Amidst the falling peach blossoms around her, it seemed like the most beautiful petal of the night. The blood was still warm. It slowly flowed out from the wound, sliding over the tip of the sword and then slowly dripping down. The blood dyed his clothes red, but it could not warm up her sword. The sword was like ice, stabbing into his chest. He should have retreated, flipped, crouched on the ground, or flown up. He should have used hidden weapons, strange moves, risked his life, and gambled. In such a dangerous situation, this man should have had dozens of ways to adapt to the situation, to struggle, to counterattack, to fight for that last chance of survival. But for some reason, after Lu Chen's body froze, he still stopped in place. His hand dropped and the black sword also moved away from Su Qingjun's throat. Su Qingjun's bright and deep eyes quietly looked at him. Her hand was as steady as a boulder, her sword as bright as autumn water. She looked at his chest, looked at the blood staining his clothes. Bit by bit, it slowly spread out. He did not retreat to escape, and she did not continue forward. The night was as cold as water. They just stood there silently, facing each other, looking at each other without saying a word. This situation seemed a bit sad, but also a bit funny. It was like two children who had been good to each other, but after quarreling and getting angry, they still remembered how good the other was, but they still had to be angry and glare at each other. Because there were some things that were still hard to forget. You killed my only brother. After an unknown amount of time, Su Qingjun finally spoke. Her voice was calm and unperturbed, but it seemed to echo in the night. It was unknown if she had said these words to herself countless times in the past few years. Lu Chen remained silent, but he didn't appear to be timid or guilty. He didn't avoid her gaze, nor did he avoid her piercing gaze. He looked at her and then nodded. The blood on his chest slowly seeped out a bit more. The corner of Su Qingjuan's lips twitched like she was gritting her teeth. Her face seemed to be covered in a layer of frost, making it hard for people to see her heart under the ice. She firmly looked at this man, looked at the blood on his chest, and asked word by word, why? He deserved to die. Lu Chen did not explain, nor did he say too many words. He only used these 3 words to answer her. Su Qingjun fell silent. After a while, she spoke again, because of Xian? Yes. Lu Chen said, for Xian. The two of them fell silent again. After a while, Su Qingjuan's gaze fell on Lu Chen's right hand. That hand was still holding a black blade. Not long ago, it had been placed on her white and tender neck. In the dark night, it seemed to have restrained all of its light. Why did you put away your sword just now? She asked him. Lu Chen smiled and said in a low voice, I have already killed many people who have been good to me. I don't want you to be one more. Su Qingjun stared at this man's eyes, as if she wanted to see through his heart, through the dark flames in his black pupils, as if she wanted to see all of his secrets. After a moment, she took a step back. The cold blade slowly left his chest and was pulled out from between the flesh and blood. Blood suddenly sprayed out, but fortunately, there was not too much blood. It was probably because the sword was sharp that the wound caused was small. Lu Chen reached out to cover the wound on his chest and silently treated it. Not long after, the wound stopped bleeding. He raised his head to look at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun had sheathed her sword at some point and walked to the blossoming peach tree. She stared blankly at the beautiful peach blossoms. They were as beautiful as gems in the night sky, exuding exuberant vitality. It is rare to see such beautiful peach blossoms on the mountains of Kunlun. At this moment, she had her back to Lu Chen. Not long ago, they had fought to the death, and she had even stabbed her sword into his chest. Lu Chen slowly walked over, glanced at her, and then stood beside her under the peach tree. The night wind blew, and the peach blossoms slightly trembled, swayed, and a few petals fell. The flowers are in full bloom, and they will probably wither in a few days, he said. Su Qingjun stretched out her hand and caught a falling petal. It was small, soft, and pink, and fell into her white and delicate palm. It was like the most beautiful words in spring, like her face when she was happy. She sighed softly and let go of her palm, letting the petal drift away with the wind. As for Xian's funeral, her family has already prepared for her. She was buried in the ancestral land in a lively and grand manner, she said faintly. She paused in the middle as if she was a little hesitant, but in the end, she still continued and said, I wanted to go and pay my respects to her, but her parents refused, so I could only pay my respects in the direction of her grave at the edge of the cliff outside the cave. Lu Chen shook his head and said, It's none of your business. You don't have to do this. Su Qingjun smiled a little sadly and said, When she was alive, she used to call me elder sister, and I used to think of her as a younger sister. In these years, I often think of her in the dead of night, and then I can't sleep. What about you? She looked at Lu Chen, stared into his eyes, and asked, In these years, you have been a fugitive, and the 4 seas are your home. In the end, have you ever thought of an old friend and couldn't sleep? No. Lu Chen met her gaze and said calmly, I have a clear conscience, and I sleep well. I occasionally think of Xian, but I don't think of her often. Su Qingjuan's face suddenly paled. She turned around with a whoosh and stared at Lu Qin, shouting, "That's right, you're a real man. You're truly a straightforward person. You kill people and then run off to the ends of the earth, but have you ever thought about me? Do you know how I lived these years? How many people looked at me with strange eyes? Even my parents treated me coldly, and saw me as an enemy. Every time I went home, it was like entering an ice house. Every night, I would think of that night, my younger brother who died in front of me, and the scene of you killing him. Every night, I would wake up from my dream. I just want to ask you, that night, why didn't you just kill me as well?" She angrily and sorrowfully asked Lu Chen in a loud voice. Lu Chen was silent. After a while, he said, "At that time, I liked you." Su Qingjuan's body suddenly stopped, and the entire courtyard became quiet at that moment. The night wind blew, and peach blossoms fell, bringing with them a wisp of fragrance, landing on their shoulders and hair. You're tuning in to the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.